Programme motion. Minister to move. No debate? No debate? No. She's back to move. So the question is the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill. Motion as on the order paper. I'm going to move straight on to the votes then, yes? Yep. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. The clerk will now proceed to read orders of the day.
Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill, as amended in the Public Bill Committee, to be considered.
Now, we will begin with new clause 18, with which it will be convenient to consider other new clauses, amendments and new schedules as listed on the selection paper for day 1. I call the Minister to move new clause 18. Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and may I start by thanking all right honourable members from across the House for their valuable contributions throughout the passage of the bill to date. In particular, members of the Public Bill Committee for providing substantial debate and scrutiny. The Children's Wellbeing Bill is a landmark bill and a key piece of legislation which will enable us to deliver the government's opportunity mission, our determination to break the link between young people's background and their future success. It will protect children at risk of abuse. It will stop vulnerable children falling through the cracks in services. And it will deliver a core guarantee of high standards with space for innovation in every child's education. And it will put in place a package of support to drive high and rising standards throughout education, throughout children's social care, so that every child can achieve and thrive. Now, reforming children's social care is critical to giving hundreds of thousands of children and young people the start in life that they deserve. And our approach to reform will break down barriers by shifting the focus of the children's social care system to early support to keep families together. We will ensure children can remain with their families where appropriate, support more children to live with kinship carers or in fostering families, and fix the broken care market to tackle profiteering and put children's needs first. Madam Deputy Speaker, the previous government bequeathed to us a bitter inheritance, not only child poverty affecting across great swathes of our country, 1 in 3 or even 1 in 2 of our young people, not just record numbers of children out of school or not turning up for school, not merely a children's social care system at breaking point. No, bitterest of all, they left a fiscal black hole which must be tackled to get this country's finances and future back on track, but which limits the speed which we can deliver on the ambition we have, which all members on this side of the House have for a brighter future for Britain's children. Madam Deputy Speaker, I will now turn to speak to our government amendments. New Clause 18 to New Clause 22 introduce corporate parenting duties on government departments and relevant public bodies. Now, a previous Labour Prime Minister observed, following Tourney, that what a wise parent would wish for their children, so the state must wish for all its children. And that is a principle which lies behind the change this amendment seeks to bring today, as we ensure that across the public sector we recognise the moral and necessary obligation to do all we can to level the playing field for children in care and for care leavers. Now, this group of young people face significant disadvantages. 26% of the homeless population is care experienced. Around a quarter of the adult prison population have been in care as a child, and care leavers aged 19 to 21 are over 3 times more likely to not be in education, employment or training than their peers. New Clause 18 introduces corporate parenting responsibilities for departments and the relevant public bodies, referred to as relevant authorities, listed in new Schedule 1. Now, new corporate parents will need to be alert to the needs of children in care and care leavers and assess the services or support that they provide which are available to them. They will also need to seek to provide them with the opportunities to participate in activities designed to promote their well-being or enhance their employment prospects. I will give way.
Minister, I very much welcome what you're saying in your reply and statement there. Last week, some of us had an opportunity to visit an event last Wednesday. It was Jamie Oliver was the person who was there. He's dyslexic. He put forward the issue that I think we need to recognise is that those with dyslexic and autism and challenging educational behaviours also need to be helped. So I asked the Minister very quickly, is that some of the sections of the population that also need help will receive help, please? Thank you.
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention. I know he's a tireless champion for children and young people and regularly writes to me, even though education is a devolved matter. I will come on to saying a bit more later around the support available for children with SEND. He will know that this is at crisis point and this government is absolutely committed to reforming the system and working at pace in order to do so. Madam Deputy Speaker, new clause 20 introduces a duty on new corporate parents and local authorities in England to work collaboratively with each other when it is in the best interests of children in care and care leavers when undertaking these duties. Now, this is to avoid silo working or duplication of efforts, addressing the challenges that children in care and care leavers face holistically in the same way that parents do when supporting their children. New Clause 21 introduces a duty on relevant authorities to have regard to guidance issued by the Secretary of State. And the guidance will set out how the duty relates to different corporate parents and how this will continue to contribute to outcomes we seek for children in care and care leavers. We will develop this guidance in partnership with the sector and with the relevant authorities listed in new Schedule 1. New Clause 22 introduces a duty on the Secretary of State to report on their corporate parenting activity every 3 years, bringing accountability to the new duty and allowing us to monitor progress and the impact of implementation. New Schedule 1 also provides a power for the Secretary of State to amend the list of corporate parents by affirmative regulations. Now, the purpose here is clear that where children in care and care leavers can be further supported by the addition of new public duties as corporate parents, or where we need to make changes to existing ones, they need not wait for fresh primary legislation, and we shall have the power to act swiftly and powerfully in their interest so that we have the means to do so this swiftly. I'm sure that the Right Honourable and Honourable members across this House share this government's ambition to drive a step change in the experiences and outcomes of some of the most vulnerable children and young people in society, and will support these new clauses. I will give way.
I thank the Minister for giving way on that point, and I thank him for his speech. Although not explicitly mentioned in this document, young carers are obviously a group of young people that are potentially vulnerable. And having spoken to the DfE, I know there are parts of the bill that will support young carers better. I wonder if he could touch upon that.
Minister.
Yeah, I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and absolutely supporting young carers is a key priority for this government. I know that he's a real champion on these issues and very happy to work with him to make sure their views are heard in this place, and I thank him again for his intervention. Madam Deputy Speaker, the government is also tabling amendments in relation to the bill's information sharing and consistent identifier duties clause 4. The wider picture here is that too often children are failed by inadequate or patchy information sharing, and this is not good enough. The bill enables us to bring change children need, and the amendments ensure that we get that right from the outset. These amendments will ensure that where those in scope engage others to provide services related to safeguarding or promoting the welfare of children, such as primary care providers, the duties will also extend to the providers of those services. This is not intended to cover providers engaged by those in scope for other purposes, but which may incidentally engage with the relevant functions. For example, IT service providers or interpreters, and who do not independently hold information that is not already available to the agencies in scope. This will be clarified in statutory guidance. Now, the government has also tabled amendments to clauses 4, 13 and 18 to ensure that information sharing powers and duties in the bill contain standard provision where appropriate. These amendments are required to make clear that data protection legislation will and must be complied with to ensure that where appropriate restrictions on the sharing of data, such as a duty of confidence, do not prevent the sharing of data, and to ensure drafting consistency across the bill. Now, the government is also moving amendments that allows information to be shared between the Department for Education and the Care Quality Commission about a provider's financial risk. After 14 years of inaction, of failing outcomes and soaring costs, it is long past time for government to make the changes we seek to make through this bill to secure both higher capacity and more resilience among providers. And again, those are the changes we seek to bring through the bill, and the amendments we move today make sure we get those changes right. There are providers who operate both adult and children's social care services. Some of these are very large and therefore may be subject to both our new Children's Social Care Financial Oversight Scheme and the Care Quality Commission's Market Oversight Scheme, which has been operating for many years in the adult social care market. Now, these amendments allow information to be shared between the Department for Education and the Care Quality Commission about a provider's financial risk, particularly in advance of either oversight scheme issuing advance warning to local authorities. This will help the department inform an accurate, real-time assessment of financial risk. Now, there is another group of government amendments which we are moving today which apply the relevant clauses in this bill to Wales, following the Welsh Government having considered these and agreeing with their application. Members here, especially those representing Welsh constituencies, will know already the difference it makes to have a Labour government in London and Cardiff, which not only puts our children first, but work together constructively and at pace to deliver the change children in every part of the United Kingdom deserve. And I want to pay tribute to Lynn Neagle, MS, the Cabinet Secretary for Education in the Welsh Government, for her help in enabling to answer together that children in Wales, as well as England, will benefit from the new protections in the legislation. The first group of today's amendments in this area will extend the application of the ill treatment and wilful neglect offence in the Criminal Justice and Courts Act 2015 to children aged 16 and 17 in regulated establishments in Wales as well as England. There is currently a gap in the legal framework, meaning that it is not possible to prosecute individuals for low-level abuse of 16 to 70-year-olds in the regulated children's social care establishments or youth detention accommodation. The current offences in sections 20 and 21 of the Criminal Justice and Courts Act apply to both England and Wales, and this amendment seeks to maintain that application in relation to the amended offence. Secondly, an amendment will extend the application of the Deprivation of Liberty Order measure to Wales, and this will enable Welsh local authorities to seek authorisation to deprive children of liberty in relevant accommodation within England. Now, we recognise the importance of keeping children close to home within their safe and loving communities where this is possible and in the best interests of the child. However, in some circumstances where it keeps a child safe from harm, a cross-border placement is the right option. This amendment will ensure that where a cross-border placement which deprives liberty is in the best interest of the child can either be placed by Welsh local authorities in a secure children's home or as at present, or be deprived of their liberty in relevant accommodation in England which may better suit their needs. In both cases, the legislative consent motion process is engaged as this measure applies to Wales and falls within the legislative competence of the Senedd Cymru and are working closely with the Welsh Government on this. We are continuing to have conversations with the Scottish Government on extending this measure to local authorities in Scotland. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, to conclude, the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill is a landmark piece of legislation through which we're delivering the biggest overhaul to children's social care in a generation. Our actions will transform children's lives, keeping children safe and ensuring opportunity and better life chances for all children. I'm grateful to all the Right Honourable and Honourable members who have made efforts to improve the bill and for their scrutiny and debate so far. I'd like to also extend my thanks to all those organisations and individuals who contributed to the development of the bill and submitted evidence, including witnesses at the bill's oral evidence session. We will continue to work closely with those organisations throughout the passage of the bill. I look forward to hearing further contributions and debate from members this afternoon on this bill as we continue to work across the House and beyond to break down the barriers to opportunity and give every child the best start in life.
New clause NC18, corporate parenting responsibilities.
The question is that new clause 18 be read a second time, and I call the Shadow Minister, Neil O'Brien.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy. Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to concentrate today on our new clause 36, banning phones from our schools. And this new clause would also write into law some of the content from the very good private members bill drafted by the Honourable Member for Whitehaven and Workington, because this doesn't need to be a party political issue. Now, when I was on the Science and Technology Committee back in 2018, I got us to do a report on screen time, social media and children's mental health. And back then, the evidence was already very, very concerning. But by now, every alarm bell should be ringing. Because over the last decade, there's been an explosion in mental health problems among young people all over the world, over the exact same period that smartphones and social media have become dominant in children's lives. And the growth in mental health problems is focused almost entirely among young people, not older people. Children now get smartphones at a very early age. As the Education Select Committee pointed out in a good report last year, 1 in 5 of the UK's 3- and 4-year-olds now have their own smartphone. By the end of primary school, 4 out of 5 kids have a smartphone. And there are many channels, many different ways through which smartphones and social media cause problems for children. They displace time in the real world with friends. US data, for example, shows that prior to 2012, children spent over 2 hours a day with friends. But by 2019, that halved. The proportion of children feeling lonely and isolated at school has exploded all over the developed world. But it's not just a time sink, there's also the lack of sleep. Children are tired in school. ADHD has increased massively. Concentration is impaired. And this is a feature, not a bug. Apps are designed to be addictive and drip feed you dopamine. At a recent school meeting I organised in my own constituency, I heard from local doctors about how excessive screen time is damaging eyesight and giving young kids the kind of back problems you might expect from someone in late middle age. 8 out of 10 children are now exposed to violent porn before age 18, many at a really young age. The average age kids see porn at now is 13. The shift to a smartphone-based childhood is also leading children to be exposed to graphic violence, sextortion, self-harm encouragement and doing terrible things to girls' self-image. According to the ONS, 1 in 5 children aged 10 to 15 say they've been bullied online, with 72% of that happening during school time. But as well as being bad in their own right, these different negative effects also come together to damage education. And while the ban of phones in schools can't fix everything, it's a vital first step, and it can make a big difference in itself. I spoke to one head teacher who said that when they went from a policy of phones not being out to a full start of the day to end of the day ban with phones handed in, the number of detentions that they had to hand out fell by 40%, and teacher recruitment and retention improved too. Yeah, I'm happy to give way.
I thank the Shadow Minister for giving way, and please take this as a constructive intervention. As a former teacher, I do know some of the challenges of mobile phones, and the Minister will remember my debate on financial education when hers went off. However, I would ask the Shadow Minister just to consider groups that may require a mobile phone. And I perhaps gave the Shadow Minister a hint as to what I was going to mention, in particular young carers who obviously do need that contact with family and those cared for.
The Honourable Member has brilliantly anticipated a point I was going to make, and if you look at the text of the amendment, you'll see it carefully, he will see it's carefully drafted exactly to allow carve-outs for those who do need them, for example, as health devices. So I hope he is reassured on that point. Madam Deputy Speaker, attempts by the tech industry to lobby, to muddy the water, to run interference and to sow confusion are unconvincing. The problems hitting our children all over the world are not just a coincidence, there is more and more evidence for a causal link. For example, Sapien Labs asked questions about adults' mental health, combined them into a mental health quotient score. They asked the same people when they first got a smartphone, and the results were stark. The earlier you get a phone, the worse your mental health, particularly for girls. And as with smoking, there is a powerful social gradient also developing with smartphones and social media. And that is going to widen gaps in school achievement unless something really decisive is done. Though sadly, many people still don't know, unfortunately, about the risks from smartphones. A growing number of parents do know and are worried about the problems with smartphones and social media. But we face a collective action problem. We worry that our kids will miss out if they are the only ones without them. And that is the problem that needs solving, and government needs to be part of it. Across this country, there has been an explosion of parent-powered campaign groups aiming to fight back. Smartphone-free childhoods, safe screens, delay smartphones, the new Rage Against the Screen campaign. Over the last year, they have gained hundreds of thousands of members. And together with the Shadow Secretary of State and the Leader of the Opposition, we met with some of them this morning, and I pay tribute to their work.
Would my honourable friend give way?
I'm happy to give way.
I'm very grateful for my honourable friend giving way. When I'm visiting schools across my constituency of Epping Forest, many of these schools have instituted policies banning mobile phones, or indeed are consulting to do that. Now, sometimes there is a small degree of from pupils and sometimes indeed from parents. But does my honourable friend agree with me that if the government takes up this amendment, actually it will make it clearer and easier for schools to ban these phones and actually produce a safe and nurturing environment for our pupils in school, and it'd be easier to take it forward?
My honourable friend is completely correct, and I was going to come on to that very point. The Children's Commissioner has said, I honestly think that we will look back in 20 years' time and be absolutely horrified by what we allowed our children to be exposed to. And she is right. So the very first thing government could do is implement a proper ban on phones in our schools. I met with Parent Kind recently, and they said to me, effectively, we're allowing our kids to be fed digital drugs, and we're even allowing the dealers into the schools. And that's got to change. The last government issued guidance. It was a good start, but it's not enough, and it's not working. While 90% of schools say they have some sort of policy or some sort of ban, a survey by Policy Exchange last year found that only 1 in 10 secondary schools has a full start-to-finish ban, the policy that actually works best. Lots of schools are still trying policies where kids have their phones on them, but they're not supposed to have them out. But actually, the effect is that the kids are distracted, the teachers have to stop lessons to tell them to put them away, and you get all of the issues about bullying and social media during break times and more. As the Labour member for Folkestone and Hythe pointed out the other day, guidance which was introduced by the previous government is not working. We still have students using phones during break time and during lessons, and the problems this causes are significant. I've had many teachers say to me, this takes up so much time, it's a huge distraction, it interferes with learning. And that's right, we're now in a strange situation where Labour MPs and the Conservative Party agree that the guidance has turned out not to be enough, but the Labour front bench is insisting that it is. We are through the looking glass, Madam Deputy Speaker. So why do we need a full ban, not just guidance? Our general approach, of course, is to give autonomy to schools. But first, the guidance is not working. The Department for Education's own National Behaviour Survey, published in April last year, found that 35% of secondary school teachers reported mobile phones being used during lessons without permission. And the problem's more pronounced for older children. 46% of pupils in years 10 to 11 reported mobile phones being used when they shouldn't have, during most or all lessons. And last month, a survey by Parent Kind found that nearly half of secondary school children say they see phones being used in class where they shouldn't every single day. So the idea that the guidance has done the trick and there's no longer a problem to solve is just contradicted by the department and the government's own data. And second, we need to support schools and have their back. I know from speaking to teachers and school leaders that the pressures from a minority of parents to allow phones can be very severe. A minority of parents can be unreasonably determined that they must be able to contact their child directly at any minute of the day. But unfortunately, that comes at a cost to everyone else's education. As my honourable friend pointed out, a national ban would make things much simpler. We, the politicians, should take the flak and take the heat off of schools. Third, a full and full-on ban is needed as the start of a wider resetting of social norms about children and smartphones and social media. We need a proper ban so that kids' smartphones are put away for a whole day, including breaks. Breaks should be about physical activity, not just scrolling and scrolling. Schools should be the beachhead, the first place where we recreate the smartphone-free childhood that most of us got to enjoy. 7 hours in which we denormalise just being on your phone all the time for young people. A ban on phones in schools will, of course, not solve all these problems overnight, but it's a vital first step. When I was a health minister, I wanted us to develop an equivalent for this of like 5 bits of fruit and veg a day, or older members might remember public health campaigns like Don't Die of Ignorance or Clunk Click Every Trip. We need to do some big things to reset the culture, and the heavy exposure of our kids to addictive by design products from the tech industry is like the smoking of our generation. The other day, the Education Secretary said that phones have, quotes, no place in schools. Yet today the government are going to whip Labour MPs to vote against getting phones out of our schools. This is just silly. Having initially claimed that our proposal for a ban was a, quote, gimmick, the Education Secretary now seems to be executing a very slow U-turn. But when you see the data on what smartphones and social media are doing to our kids, you realise that we can't wait for the Education Secretary to swallow her pride. We need to get on with it. Madam Deputy Speaker, a pattern is emerging. At the start of debates on this bill, we and many of the profession pointed out that the bill would threaten to cut teacher pay. The Education Secretary said, we just didn't understand, that wasn't true. But later on, she was forced to produce pages and pages of amendments to her own bill, and it turned out it wasn't us that didn't understand the legislation. And last summer, Michael Gove was being held up by the Secretary of State as the great Satan of education. But in a most recent speech, he has now become a great education reformer. And just weeks ago, banning phones from our schools was a gimmick, but over the weekend we learned from the Secretary of State that they have no place in our schools. So it's a gimmick, but they have no place in our schools, but they're going to vote against a ban today. Madam Deputy Speaker, I think we can all now see where this is going. So tonight, Labour should swallow their pride. They should vote for our amendment and do the right thing for our children.
Yeah. Education Select Committee Chair, Helen Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak in support of new Clause 3 and new Clause 4, both in my name. The Education Select Committee was afforded little time to undertake scrutiny of this important bill, but we worked hard to do so, refocusing our ongoing inquiry on children's social care to focus on Part 1 of the bill and holding an additional evidence session to look at Part 2. And I'm grateful to all of the witnesses who came to give us their evidence. We have published a report for the Secretary of State setting out recommendations based on the evidence we received. Broadly, the committee welcomes the scale of the government's ambition as expressed in this bill, which is a key plank of the government's opportunity mission to break the link between young people's background and their future success. We join the government in wanting to see high and rising standards in our education and care systems to protect vulnerable children and ensure educational opportunity for every child. We welcome the measures in the bill to strengthen child protection, particularly the provisions to establish multi-agency child protection teams, including education in safeguarding arrangements and a single unique identifier for children, which has the potential to be a genuinely transformative for the delivery of many of the services that support children and young people. We support the measures to improve the children's social care market through regional commissioning and a financial oversight scheme. Action to remove profiteering in the children's social care sector is long overdue. The committee welcomes the measures in the bill which will enable more children to remain within their kinship network or, where a residential placement in kinship care is not possible, in contact with family and friends. The committee also made some recommendations on ways in which the bill could be further strengthened based on the evidence we received. The amendments tabled in my name directly relate to our recommendations, and I will now turn to each of the ones that are relevant to Part 1 of the bill. New Clause 3 would require the Government to publish and consult on a draft national offer for care leavers within 18 months of the Act coming into force. A national care offer would set minimum standards for local care offers and ensure greater consistency between local authority areas. A national offer would act as a floor, not a ceiling. It wouldn't be designed to prevent innovation at a local level or to stop additional commitments from being made by individual local authorities. But we believe that better national consistency, driven by government, would make a big difference. Evidence of the unacceptably poor outcomes for care-experienced young people is shocking. 39% of care leavers aged 19 to 21 are not in education, employment or training, compared with 13% of all young people in the same age group. 14% of young people with care experience go to university, compared to almost half of their peers. And care leavers are 38% more likely to drop out of university. A third of care leavers become homeless within 2 years of leaving care, and 25% of homeless people have been in care. Care leavers are hugely overrepresented in the criminal justice system. These are young people whose corporate parent has been the state. And these statistics are clear evidence that for many of them, the state is not a very good parent. So I welcome the government's amendment of the bill to introduce additional corporate parenting responsibilities. But the committee heard that there is significant disparity in the support that different local authorities offer to care leavers. We heard about the differences in support with bursaries to pay for university accommodation, access to Wi-Fi to be able to study, and ring-fenced apprenticeships for care leavers in local authorities. In a very powerful evidence session at which the committee heard from young adults with recent experience of the care system, one witness told us there needs to be a national offer for care leavers. The postcode lottery is profound. And another pointed to a lack of awareness of the needs of care-experienced people across the wider network of public services. She told us, when I had gone to the job centres, they were very ill-prepared. They did not know any support for care leavers. There were certain grants I could have had to get back into education. They did not inform me. In fact, everything I have done now is from me Googling it or asking people. That should not be the case. A national care offer would be the foundation for building better, more consistent support for care leavers everywhere in the country. It would provide the government with an effective mechanism for holding local authorities to account on the quality of their provision, making it much easier for care experienced people to understand what support should be there for them. And it would stop the current disincentive to leave home to go to university because of uncertainty about what the support will be when you get there. So I urge the government to support New Clause 3. New Clause 4 would require health assessments of children in the care system to include assessment by a mental health practitioner. It would make assessing the mental health of children in care a core part of the health assessment of those children by ensuring a mental health practitioner is involved in the assessment. Children in care are significantly more likely to have experienced trauma and abuse than their peers and are consequently more likely to experience mental ill health. In 2021, 45% of children in care had a mental health disorder, rising to 72% for those in residential care, compared with 10% of all children aged 5 to 15. The care-experienced young adults who gave powerful evidence to the committee spoke strongly about the urgent need for better mental health support and suggested that local authorities are not always fulfilling their obligations to include emotional and mental health in their health assessments of children in care. One of our witnesses told us, "Growing up, it was only physical assessments. We did not have mental health check-ins at all. I think if my mental health was taken more seriously from a young age, if I had that person to check in with me, I would probably be so much better. I would not have had the mental health problems going up. I do think that mental health check-ins are equally important, if not more important, as physical check-ins for children in care." Another witness said, "Looked after children should get mandatory assessments, as with physical health. Also, if they are referred to CAMS, the wait lists are horrific right now. Looked after children should have fast tracks and there should be more funding for specialist teams." And we heard very movingly from a witness who spoke about the need for more trauma-informed training for foster carers and other professionals working with children in care, who said, "I feel a lot could be explained if they understood the experience of trauma. It will take time. It will not go away at night. And sometimes it gets better. Before it gets better, it could get worse. No one talks about that. You will not be okay if you're going into care. There is a reason why you are there. And so it's important that the minute you go into care, every child should have a mandatory assessment, physical and mental, and there should be that on-call support for them." Madam Deputy Speaker, it is the trauma that underlies the decision to take a child into care, the abuse, neglect, bereavement or exploitation that often has the most profound impact on their lives. Our care system needs to place dealing with that trauma in a child-centred way at its heart. Ensuring that mental health assessments are properly undertaken is an essential requirement of such a system, because mental health must be assessed before treatment and support can be provided. New Clause 3 would help to deliver this refocusing of the system, which is badly needed, and I urge the government to support it. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to make two further points. I wish to add my support to the amendment in the name of my honourable friend, the member for Mitcham and Morden, which would introduce a requirement to notify a child's school and GP when they are placed in temporary accommodation. As a constituency MP in South East London, I see the horrific impact of poor quality, unstable temporary accommodation on children in my constituency every week. Temporary accommodation is harming children, whether through the sleep deprivation of having to get up at 4 a.m. to travel a long distance to your school, the lack of space to do homework, the fear and insecurity of sharing a kitchen and bathroom with strangers, the physical health impact of living with damp and mould, or the impact on gross motor development of being in a space which is too small to crawl or play in. The impacts are profound, so it is completely right that there should be a statutory requirement to notify the public services that have the ability to help mitigate such impacts and who have a responsibility towards that child's health and well-being when a child is placed in temporary accommodation. The government should be taking urgent action to reduce the numbers of people, especially families with children, in temporary accommodation, but in the short term, the new duty introduced by my honourable friend's amendment would make a difference to the support they receive. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, at the same time as we are debating this bill, the government is preparing to announce reforms to the welfare system. I wish to emphasise the vital importance of considering the impact of any proposed reforms on children. Children do not get to choose the families into which they are born, but each one is equally deserving of economic security and access to the resources they need to thrive. It is not a justifiable outcome of changes to the welfare system to make life harder for the poorest children or to increase child poverty by limiting the access to the support their parents receive. The government must undertake and publish an assessment of the impact of its welfare reforms on children, and it must ensure that children do not suffer as a result of any planned reforms.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Munira Wilson.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure and a privilege to rise to speak on part one of this bill, and in particular to the new clauses and amendments tabled in my name. Now, when this bill had its second reading, I said there was much in here, in this bill, that we on the Liberal Democrat benches welcomed, alongside areas which we would prove to amend, probe and strengthen. And this bill's progress in recent weeks has seen plenty of debate and discussion and opportunities to constructively strengthen the legislation, although the government has failed to accept any amendments that were not its own, despite the comments from the Minister at the outset. And I'm very grateful to colleagues across the House who served on the committee, where I think we had some excellent debates. However, I was disappointed, Madam Deputy Speaker, to see last week the sheer number of amendments tabled by the government ahead of report stage. And I really hope the government doesn't make a habit of depriving the committee of its chance for proper scrutiny, even if most of those measures are welcome and uncontroversial. Now, turning to new clauses and amendments in my name, Madam Deputy Speaker, as the Minister knows, care, and particularly kinship care, is a subject that is close to my and my Liberal Democrat colleagues' hearts. In committee, we discussed a number of encouraging provisions that are included in the bill on the definition of kinship care and setting out the support that kinship carers are eligible for in law, and providing additional educational support for children in kinship care. However, what we agreed at committee falls far short of the ambition that I've heard the Secretary of State herself set out at a reception for kinship carers just a few months back. And at that reception, the Secretary of State, unusually for somebody in her position, called on campaigners and policymakers to keep pushing her. And I believe the new clauses tabled in my name of new clause 25, 26, 27 and 28 do just that. New clause 25 would ensure that kinship carers are entitled to paid employment leave. New clause 26 would put into statute an entitlement to an allowance on a par with that of foster carers. New clause 27 would extend the pupil premium plus to all children in kinship care, based on the committee on the definition that has been agreed in this bill. And finally, new clause 28 would prioritise those same children for school admissions. Madam Deputy Speaker, kinship carers are unsung heroes, often stepping up at no notice to look after a child they are related to or know because their parents can no longer do so. And time and again we hear from kinship carers that what they do, that they want to do the right thing out of love for those family members, but financial and other barriers often stand in their way. One survey revealed that 45% of kinship carers give up work, and a similar number have to reduce their hours permanently, putting financial strain on the family. And those carers are disproportionately women and are overrepresented in the healthcare, education and social care sectors, which simply exacerbates our workforce crisis in public services. In committee, the Minister pointed to the kinship financial allowance pilot, which were set out in a tiny number of local authorities with a very small subset of kinship carers. These are not ambitious enough, and I say again, we must go further and give kinship carers parity with foster carers, and we know that this will help save money both in the short term as well as in the long term. Now, I want to turn, Madam Deputy Speaker, to Amendment 171, tabled in my name, which would include independent special schools in the provisions set out in Clause 15, the backstop of a profit cap on certain social care providers. Now, I'll say at the outset that I, as a Liberal, recognise the importance of private, voluntary sector and state provision in this area, as well as in many other areas of public services. However, in this case, it is clear that we have a market that is simply not functioning, and there are providers who are shamelessly profiteering from the lack of specialist provisions provision, leaving local authority finances crippled.
On that point, will my honourable friend give way?
I'm very happy to give way to my honourable
Thank you, my honourable friend. So in Surrey alone, spending on private special educational needs schools has risen from 48 million in 2018-19 to 74 million in 21-22. These schools are often backed by private equity firms, and they're charging local authorities extortionate fees, on average double that of the state sector, draining public funds. Well, councils have no choice but to place children in these schools due to a lack of state provision. Does my honourable friend agree that extending the profit cap to independent schools is essential to protect public finances and ensure fairer funding for children with special educational needs?
Munira Wilson.
I thank my honourable friend for her intervention. I hadn't shared my speech with her, but she's anticipated the next couple of points that I was just about to make, so I do agree with her very strongly. I just want to preface my comments by saying there are many, many independent special schools run by private or voluntary sector providers who do an excellent job and are certainly not profiteering in the way that I'm about to set out. But clearly that is not the case across the board, with some firms making upwards of 20% in profit on what they charge. We must challenge whether this is justified. The crisis in state special educational needs and disability provision and the lack of specialist places has led to a growth in private provision that is crippling local authority finances, as my honourable friend has just set out. In 2021-22, councils spent £1.3 billion on independent and non-maintained special schools, twice what they spent just 6 years previously. And as my honourable friend has set out, the average cost of one of those places was £56,710, which was twice the average cost of a state-run special school place. We know that many of the companies running those schools are the very same private equity companies that are running the children's homes and fostering agencies, which the power in clause 15 is designed to address. So I am therefore at a loss, Madam Deputy Speaker, as to why the government has not included independent special schools in this provision, and I urge them to think again and accept our amendment. Now, my new clause 29 would impose a requirement on the Secretary of State to introduce a national wellbeing measurement programme for children and young people throughout England. And I would like to pay tribute to Be Well and Pro Bono Economics and the wider Our Wellbeing, Our Voice coalition for their hard work in this area. As I've said several times during the passage of this bill, I am more than a little surprised to find so little about children's wellbeing in a bill that is entitled as such. With 1 in 4 children in the UK reporting low wellbeing according to PISA data, our country is the lowest ranked in Europe. Data on children's wellbeing and mental health is fragmented across the NHS, schools and local authorities, and it's crucial that we collect data to understand the challenges young people face, develop solutions and understand their efficacy through the use of robust wellbeing data. Now, turning to the Conservatives' amendment, NC 36, on wellbeing, phones and social media. This is a measure that I welcome both as a parent and as a parliamentarian. In this unprecedented digital age, we need to treat children's social media and phone addiction as a public health issue. We have long supported the previous government's guidance to schools to try and restrict mobile phones during the school day, with, importantly, proper mitigations that teachers and head teachers can use for young carers, those with medical conditions who use their phones as a medical device, and for other local circumstances that only head teachers and teachers are best placed to know.
We don't really give way.
I'm very happy to give way to the Honourable.
Dear Shannon.
Is the Honourable Member, Lady, aware of the scheme, the pilot scheme that's been brought in Northern Ireland by the Minister Paul Given, which is to have all children in some schools, as a pilot scheme, their mobile phones in pouches, therefore the mobile phone will never be in show, as a method whereby this proposal by the Conservatives would be one that perhaps could be acceptable to all. And there is that provision for those who are carers that they must have their mobile phones. So really, Northern Ireland is showing it by a pilot scheme, can I say. It's great that the House has followed our lead.
Munira Wilson.
It is always an honour to be intervened on by the Honourable Member for Strangford. And no, I agree with him. It's great to hear about that pilot in Northern Ireland, because I read that in the Republic of Ireland, the government had actually spent about €9 million issuing those pouches to schools across the country for schools to use for that purpose. So it would be good and useful and instructive for government to look at how that pilot runs. But I'm not sure Madam Deputy Speaker, we even need to wait for that pilot, frankly. School leaders and parents are pressing us to go further now, and we must listen. Putting the guidance into law will also ensure that schools have the necessary support when they are challenged on their policies and the resources to implement a mobile-free environment. For instance, one local head teacher in my constituency told me that it would cost £20,000 to his school budget to install lockers or the sorts of phone pouches that the Honourable Member for Strangford has just referenced. So children must be able to learn in an environment free from the distraction of phones and the threat of bullying. And we've also seen that in-school truancy has reduced significantly where these restrictions have been put in place robustly. I'm very happy to give way to the Right Honourable Lady.
I welcome her comments on this amendment, and I welcome the cross-party support, which demonstrates this is a cross-party issue. It's not about party allegiance. Would she agree that, with me, that the data and the evidence on this issue promoted by specialists like Jonathan Haidt show that levels of literacy, numeracy and focus amongst children have accelerated really since the early 2010s, which coincides with the accessibility that children had to phones, and that really it's an open and shut case of what this government should be doing now.
Munira Wilson.
Thank you. I thank the Right Honourable Lady for her intervention. I mean, the data is alarming. There's the data in the book she references. Last week in Hampton, in my constituency, the Smartphone Free Childhood campaign organised a public meeting with local parents, which was a pretty full meeting, and the data that was shared there was extremely alarming. And I went both as a parent and as a local MP to listen in, and I'm afraid I found myself coming out of that even less liberal than I was before I went in, and slightly more authoritarian on this issue, but mainly because actually it's the right liberal thing to do, to allow our children to grow up with the freedom of being away from such a toxic environment. But I would say gently to the Right Honourable Lady, those on the Conservative and on the Labour benches, that actually being in school is only a small part of a child's life. It's only a small fraction of their time, and actually we need to look much broader than restricting phone use in schools. And so that's why it's disappointing that neither Labour nor Conservative members supported Liberal Democrat proposals to make the internet less addictive for children during the committee stage of the Data Use and Access Bill. And after the government decided to gut the Honourable Member for Whitehaven and Workington's Safer Phones Bill, which had a lot of cross-party support, the Liberal Democrat amendment to the data bill offered MPs an opportunity to protect young people from the doom-scrolling algorithms making such powerful changes to the way they live and interact. So it's disappointing that ministers didn't seize that opportunity with both hands, and I hope they'll think again as that bill progresses through this House. The final amendment I wish to touch on, Madam Deputy Speaker, is to welcome the Honourable Member for Lowestoft's amendment to abolish the common law defence of reasonable punishment. We need to ensure that all children are properly protected in law so that they can grow up safe, happy and healthy. The Liberal Democrats have been calling for this change for more than 20 years. We supported the law change in Scotland and Wales, and it's long overdue in England too. So to conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, there is much in Part 1 of this bill on which there is cross-party consensus, and there are a range of amendments from both sides of the House that seek to ensure the government goes further in safeguarding and promoting the well-being of our children, which is surely one of the most important roles of government. So I hope that ministers are in listening mode today, and even if they won't take on board some of those amendments today, that they will do so as the bill progresses to the other place. Because after all, it is our duty to ensure that every child in this country not only survives, but thrives.
Alistair Strathern.
Speaker, it's a real pleasure to be able to be here at the Portsmouth stage of this important bill to speak to some really important amendments, but also a body of work that moves forward this country's protections and support for some of the most vulnerable people in our society for the first time in such a long time. Now, before becoming an MP, I had the privilege of being children's lead for the local authority I was serving on. And there, while many parents here might have experience being a grandparent or parent to a handful of kids, as any local authority lead and council will know, you're corporate parent to many hundreds. And it's impossible in that role not to be moved by the testimonies of the young people you're working with. They've often gone through real moments of trauma, real difficulty that would knock any of us for six. But in the face of that, their resilience, their determination to better themselves is something that we should all be inspired by, but that we all owe it as guardians of this country's collective obligations to young people in care to make sure we're stepping up to fulfil our side of that corporate parenting role too. In that, guys, I'm incredibly happy to see government amendments 18 to 22 today widening the role of corporate parenting to other local stakeholders. As a local authority lead working with Care Experience campaigner Terry Galloway, I was really happy to be able to take on some of this work at a local level, working with some fantastic local stakeholders to broaden our obligations as corporate parents and to bring other local government bodies into the sphere of those who are trying to do best by the young people that we had in our care. But it's clear that in isolation, that can't be good enough. And without clear legislation requiring more local stakeholders to take on that important role, we're never going to be able to get all of the partnerships involved that can have such a transformative impact in supporting young people in care at that crucial early stage. No parent would only think about a young person as their child in a narrow subset of their role, and the state and our obligations as corporate parents should be no different to that. So I'm very glad to see these amendments coming forward today. I know many in this House and beyond have been campaigning on them for some time, including my honourable friend, the member for Whitehaven and Workington, who recommended indeed some of these measures in his report into social care a few years ago. And I'm very, very glad that having seen very little action on this under the previous government, this government is wasting no time in widening that obligation and therefore widening the corporate parents who have the back of some of our young people in care right across the country. I'm also very glad to see some of the amendments in place to strengthen information sharing being brought forward by the government today too. Having had to read lots of very difficult, serious case reviews after tragic incident after tragic incident was able to happen to young people right across the country due to failures in information sharing and failures of agencies to work together effectively, strengthening that has got to be a core part of our approach to bettering our obligations to young people, to the safeguarding of young people in this country, right across the local authorities that work with them. So seeing that strengthened information sharing, seeing that strengthened multi-agency working brought forward as part of this bill is truly welcome. In addition to that, there are a number of really other important clauses in this bill too. Clauses 8 and 9, strengthening that obligation to care leavers is very welcome. No parent will see their obligations to young people in care ending at the age of 18, and the state should be no different either. Ending the perverse circumstances whereby a child who was leaving care could be ruled intentionally homeless, and making sure that we've got a stronger and more widely available care offer to those who are leaving care, hopefully will mean that local authorities right across the country can be empowered to do more to live up to that obligation we all have as parents to do right by young people long into adulthood. Now, there are a number of other amendments about strengthening some of that provision that I appreciate the government may not be bringing forward today, but I'm sure we will need to continue to revisit as we go forward through monitoring how this new obligation on local authorities play out. Because doing right by those young people cannot end at 18, and therefore has to make sure that we are continuing to consider how our role as corporate parents continue long into children's life and moving into young adults. Many of the young people that I worked with as a local authority lead would welcome that extra support, and many of them, I'm sure, will be very welcoming of that start of support made in this bill today. Alongside that, I think it's a pretty well appreciated fact right across the House now that the overly bureaucratic care system hasn't always done enough to recognise the importance of wider family networks at really important moments of young people's life. So the bill's clauses to bring forward stronger commitments around family group decision making and recognising the role and importance of kinship carers and strengthening the educational support available to those in kinship care are truly welcome. As too, while not in this bill, is the government's record financial commitment to expanding a kinship care pilot and making sure that we start to understand the value that wider financial support could have in enabling more young people to be looked after by a wider member of the family network rather than falling into more formalised care. Now, in order to do right by young people and to protect their well-being, I know whether it's reforming SEND to further conversations around smartphones and keeping young people safe online, there's going to be further work for this government to do. And in responding to the private member's bill on safer phones, it was very welcome to hear the Minister confirm this government's commitment to continuing to do more in this space in the future. But in the meantime today, I'm very happy to be supporting a bill. If you'd like to intervene, I'd be very happy to.
Damian Hinds?
I think you'll find what they committed to do was do some research.
I think you'll find from the front bench he did not just commit to do some research, he committed to bring forward a statement into some really important aspects of online health that had not been formally commented on the government before. And I would gently suggest that if the government are so clear and so, if the opposition does... Oh, absolutely.
Can I thank my honourable friend? And can I ask him, of the 6 education secretaries we had since 2019, did any of them propose banning mobile phones in schools, or is this the latest bandwagon from the opposition?
I thank my honourable friend who could not have put my next point better. I completely recognise that this is a really important topic. It's important for parents and schools right across my constituency too. But the idea that having had 14 years to bring this forward, the opposition have suddenly had a dazzling conversion to the idea that this is something that cannot wait and must be delivered now, at a time where there is not clear consensus amongst educational professionals or parents about the best way to bring such a ban into effect, I'm afraid feels disingenuous at best. Now, I share lots of their concerns too, and I hope over time to be able to work across this House to bring forward good protections to that effect. But what I simply will not do is indulge in trying to turn this issue into an opportunity to posture from a party that had so long and did so little on this work. In conclusion, though, Madam Deputy Speaker, I am very glad to be supporting a bill that delivers step changes in protections for young people, step changes in support for care leavers, and a step change in support for kinship carers. For too long, we've not done enough to look after some of the most vulnerable young people in our society, and I'm glad that this bill and some of the amendments the government is bringing forward today underline our government's commitment to ensuring that we do far, far better on this front than the last did.
I will urge members to ensure that they keep language respectful at all times. And now, of course, Stephen Barclay.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I rise to speak to Clause 9 of the bill and to the important issue of looked after children, which is, I think, an issue that people across the House care extremely seriously about. And it's that reason that the bill is so disappointing in terms of the missed opportunity on supply, on demand, but particularly on the concern I have representing a rural constituency with cheaper housing around the concentration of looked after children in particular communities, and the regional commissioning within the bill fails to sufficiently address. But just to take, Madam Deputy Speaker, those issues in order. Firstly, on the issue of supply, and certainly in Bill Committee there was a lot of discussion around profiteering and some of the issues there. And I'm sure the Minister would respond to me pointing out the silence of the bill in addressing that real issue, and probably shared issue, in terms of how we boost supply, by pivoting to talk of the profit clawback. But the concern I have with the profit clawback is when the Minister comes to claw back the money, he will find it has long since moved. And it will be helpful perhaps in closing whether the Minister could clarify what is the estimate they've given the Treasury as to how much money they expect to recover in clawback, because certainly I think on this side of the House there's a suspicion it won't be particularly effective. Likewise, I think there's missed opportunities in this bill in terms of reducing demand. And I very much echo the points that my right honourable friend, the member for Harborough, Oadby and Wigston made in Bill Committee around boosting foster carers, an issue again frequently debated across the House. And I accept that isn't a panacea to all the issues in looked after children, particularly those needing secure accommodation. But I think again one would have expected the bill to go further in that regard. It's also the case that what the government is doing in terms of unaccompanied child migrants is further exacerbating demand. And I draw the Minister's attention to the 2023 Home Office research that show not only a massive increase in the number of unaccompanied child migrants, but in disputed cases where people were claiming to be a child when the concern was they were an adult, in half of those, 49% of those cases, the individual was found to be an adult. And again, that is further stoking demand, and it is very regrettable that the government is not taking action and indeed reversing some of the safeguards put in place by the previous government to reduce that demand. And again, Clause 9 is silent on those issues. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, my principal concern, my third but main concern, representing a rural community, is the sense that the regional commissioning risks being further detached from local communities where there is cheap housing and where there is therefore a temptation to further concentrate looked after children in a way that doesn't join across the government silos with areas like police funding or with housing. And perhaps I'll just give the House a specific example of that. So Cambridgeshire, because it has had significant population growth, but the police funding is based on the population as it was in 2012, that is how the police grant is calculated, does not pick up the additional pressures that the Cambridgeshire force is facing, in particular facing in its rural communities. But that is then exacerbated, particularly where we have those who are looked after children with a troubled history interacting with the criminal justice system, or indeed some of the challenges around unaccompanied child migrants. And there's nothing in this bill that says that where regional commissioning is used, how that is interplaying into the police formula, the police funding, even though the data is very clear, and the data I have from Cambridgeshire Police, that a significant proportion of their time is spent as a consequence of this policy. And just one example of that is the requirements on the police when a child goes missing, and quite rightly, when a child goes missing, that is an issue of significant concern, and of course that is something that the police should prioritise time to. But where you have a concentration of care homes in rural communities, that can be a significant additional resource that they face. So in conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, the clause 9 of the bill, I think, fails both to address supply, fails to address demand, but in particular where I would push the Minister in his or her closing, is what will be done around the fact that it is further divorced from the rural communities where often this commissioning is placed. And with a government that is hammering rural communities in so many areas, not least on farming, how is the government going to reassure my constituents in Fenland that the failure for the money to follow the looked after children sufficiently is going to be addressed? And I finish just with one example, which is the recent data coming from councils. So the Home Office reimburses councils for their spending on children aged under 18 at the rate of between £114 and £143 a day. And councils were reported on the 15th of February of this year saying that those payments from central government do not cover all the costs. The risk is rural communities that have been hammered by this government on farming and so many other areas will then have to pick up the police costs, the health service impacts, and the other impacts on public services that come from more distant regional commissioners, which is exactly what Clause 9 risks doing. And it would be helpful if the Minister could say a little bit more about that when he comes to close.
Tristan Osborne.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise to support this bill today and the amendments tabled by the Government, and specifically I'll be talking about new clauses 18 to 22 on corporate parenting, new clauses 44 to 46 on kinship, and also in reference to clause 36, the opposition amendment this afternoon. As a former teacher in secondary schools in Kent, I believe these measures are overwhelmingly welcomed by many of my constituents and also professionals across social working and social care and in the education sector. And of course, the context behind this bill and its amendments is 14 years of cuts to many secondary schools, to social care services in councils across the country. And successive cuts have been made to school teachers and those supporting children in the front line, where many children left in contextual settings that were inappropriate, and where schools had to constantly chase other agencies for resolutions. And of course, we've had 6 education secretaries since 2019 under the opposition, a revolving door that would make the average attendance officer blush. If I can now get to the specifics, Amendment new clauses 18 to 22 tabled by the Secretary of State ensures clearer responsibilities on corporate parenting, and I welcome the strengthened provision for care leavers, including the responsibilities now indicated to local authorities to support the transition of young people into adulthood and independent living. This transition is always a period of tumult for many young people, but for our most vulnerable, they do not have the support of parents to manage. And I welcome the changes to the the Housing Act to clarify that care leavers should not be considered intentionally homeless and should be supported. I also support new clauses 44 to 46, which provides much greater clarity on registered providers. In my area of Medway, many young people were placed in providers where people had serious contextual safeguarding concerns, and many of these residences were unregistered. Unsurprisingly, these children ended up being involved with the police and through local authorities, as the environment and management of these homes was in some cases unscrutinised and poor. And as chair of the Community Safety Partnership in Medway, we regularly saw waves, sadly, of criminality associated with some of these homes. And so therefore I welcome the measures to tighten up on the audit and scrutiny of these by regulators. In addition, I do welcome the debates in New Clause 25 and also by other members on kinship care in the UK. Kinship care plays a vital role in supporting children who are unable to live with their birth parents, offering them a familiar and supportive environment during a challenging time. There are over 141,000 children in kinship care in England and Wales, and the benefits of kinship care are significant, and they should be offered the same redress as those in foster care. Children placed with relatives or close family friends are often able to maintain stronger emotional bonds, retain connections to their cultural identity and stay within their local communities. So the clauses that I see the government going further on is to really support kinship care, and I would urge them to continue to do that, working in dialogue with backbench MPs and other charity and third sector organisations. Lastly, I just want to talk as experience as a teacher on Clause 36 on the effective management and banning of mobile phones and its safeguarding components specifically linked to Part 1. As a former teacher myself, this is something that has significant merit with issues around mental health, social media bullying and screen time causing concern, which is the reason why I welcome the government's position of further research in this space. However, I might say many schools already operate policies to this effect, including no phones visible policies during the school day. So before I can support any such proposals, we would need to get clarity as to the professional distance within any such amendment, including what would happen if a child were to be found with a phone. Would that lead to an immediate suspension or expulsion? What happens if a mobile phone is concealed? Our teachers are expected to challenge students and try and overturn their pockets. Is that, according to many professionals, that is a step too far? And I would need real guidance before advising teachers in trying to challenge students that might not have a visible phone on them but might have suspicion of having one. Okay, and just lastly on this, there does need to be further work consulting. Where do we draw the difference between a mobile phone and a tablet device, such as an iPad, which many children might also bring into school, but might also contain social media access? And actually, is there not a conversation to be had with engaging with social media providers and other companies to actually withdraw the use of services for those under 18, as opposed to stopping them holding the technology? Especially given we know that much of this is actually linked to out-of-school activity as well as in-school activity. So there are further debates that need to be had on this topic, rather than simply just jumping to the ban. And just lastly, there are many things that students do in schools which we might challenge, such as eating foods that we might not agree, from consuming significant quantities of other foods and other products. But we have to be careful here. Digital devices and digital literacy is important if they're to grow up into adults that understand the context of the digital devices they hold. And banning can have a cobra effect in terms of not allowing children to manage themselves on these devices. So I just want to finish. The amendments in this, many as they are, do show the importance of an holistic approach to education. This bill and the amendments acknowledge academic achievement alone is not sufficient to a children's success, and there is a broader responsibility on agencies and social services to support our most vulnerable. And in part 1 of this bill, it does link holistically to other parts, which will be discussed tomorrow on free breakfast clubs, cuts to school uniform costs, and reforms and paying conditions. So I would urge all members to support these amendments. Thank you.
Will Forster.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, for calling me to speak on this important children's wellbeing and schools bill. I wish to focus my attention on 2 amendments, 2 new clauses. Firstly, new clause 33 that I'm calling Zara's Law after Zara Sharif, my murdered constituent. And this comes out of the findings of a recent review conducted by the Children's Commissioner. I'd like to thank the NSPCC and others who have suggested a raft of great changes that could be made to the bill when it comes to improving how we look after children in the UK. And the list can be ever-ending, with so many great contributions from many. But knowing what happened to Zara, we know the system, I know the system, isn't protecting vulnerable children like it should. It failed her. So I'm hoping to untie that fundamental knot in the children's social care system. The sad reality is the level of support a child receives too often depends not on their needs, but on where they live and the thresholds that council has for stepping in and saving a child from abuse and neglect. As it stands today, there is an unacceptable inequality in how local authorities interpret thresholds for an intervention under Section 17 of the Children Act 1989. That means children at risk in one council area may receive early help and intervention if a family is in crisis. Yet in another, they're left without that intervention that could protect them, if not save their life. Every child in this country has effectively been entered into a postcode lottery, and we are gambling with their lives by not attempting to repair that flaw. We need to look at the devastating case of Zara to understand the consequences of having a system that lacks consistency and clear national standards. I don't think we can put a price on a child's life and only decide to step in based on resources, and that's the current system. It's clear that social services over the years have struggled, with deep cuts to funding and services, and the Liberal Democrats and I are not yet fully confident that the new government will fully fund local authorities. Zara was just 10 years old when she was brutally murdered after, sadly, years of torture and slavery at the hands that were supposed to love her. She was known to social services, yet the response was not sufficient to protect her. Would clearer national guidance with stronger thresholds for intervention have made a difference? In my opinion, yes. Would automatic referrals, such as those proposed in this clause, have ensured that professionals had the opportunity to intervene before it was too late? In my view, yes. The clause calls for a review of the variation in children in need support across the country and critically requires the government to establish national standards for when and how children should receive help. It sets out clear triggers for automatic referral to children's social care, such as when a primary caregiver enters custody or becomes an inpatient for mental health care, or when a child is arrested. There are moments of profound instability in a child in that case, yet without that clear national standards, without having a proactive approach, too many slip through the cracks. My constituent Zara slipped through the cracks. That is why in January, when I asked the Prime Minister if he would call for an inquiry into the failings of the state surrounding the death of Zara, he did say the government would look into it. We're still waiting for the Prime Minister to update the House. The proposed changes would set expectations on how frequently a child's situation should be reviewed. Cases like Zara's remind us that it's not enough to assess a child once and then step away. Their needs need to be updated and reviewed regularly. The risks can escalate quickly. There are warning signs, and if regular checks are not in place, intervention comes too late with morbid consequences. This new clause is about accountability, consistency, and most importantly, protection. We cannot continue to accept a system where a child's safety depends on geography and resource rather than need. I think MPs from across the House, but particularly the government, have a moral duty to protect these vulnerable children. And there are so many children out there that are still in danger. I hope NC 33 is agreed, and if it is not agreed, I hope the government would consider it, and particularly when it comes to the debate in the other place. Madam Deputy Speaker, I also wish to draw the House's attention to the Honourable Member for Lowestoft's amendment, NC8, that I know has been referred to today. That would ensure that corporal punishment could not be used as a defence in court if they're trying to hide from harming a grievous harm on a child. And I don't think this is about preventing parents from reasonably reprimanding their children. It's about closing a legal loophole that abusers have regularly used or attempted to use to evade justice. We saw this in the case of Zara, whose father, Irfan, sought to use such a defence to avoid accountability for the terrible suffering, tantamount to torture, is what the judge said, that Irfan inflicted. No child should endure such brutality. No perpetrator should be able to hide behind those awful, outdated legal justifications. I think we should standardise child protection in this country and close those loopholes that currently exist that abusers can exploit. This bill, if amended right, gives us that chance to do that. Let's take that opportunity and protect vulnerable children. Thank you, Madam.
Very powerful indeed. Jess, Asato.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise today in support of new Clause 8 tabled in my name and with the support of many colleagues across the House, organisations including the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health, Barnardo's, the NSPCC and the Children's Commissioner for England. And I'm grateful to honourable members for Twickenham and Woking for your comments in this debate today. New Clause 8 would amend Section 58 of the Children Act 2004 to remove the reasonable punishment defence that permits assault and battery on children by parents and carers. Children in Scotland and Wales already have the same protections as adults when it comes to being hit, but we find ourselves in the peculiar situation where a child growing up just over the border in England has fewer rights. And why should they? What is different between a child growing up in Berwick-upon-Tweed and a child in Bonnyrigg? Scotland and Wales are not alone in this. 67 countries around the world have already banned physical punishment. Tajikistan last year became the latest, and 27 others have also committed to a ban. There is a global recognition that children deserve better. Indeed, as part of the UK's own commitment to the 16th Sustainable Development Goal, we have already pledged to ending all violence against children, and that includes physical punishment in the home. The UN Committee on the Rights of the Child has stated unequivocally that protection from physical punishment is a basic human right of a child. Physical punishment is not punishment, it is abuse. We have a wealth of research to draw on from the last 30 years, and not a single reputable study has found that physical punishment positively impacts child's development. There is no evidence to say that it improves behaviour in children. The reality is that physical punishment does not establish in a child's mind a difference between right and wrong. It simply evokes fear, fear of violence and fear of pain. And we know that children who are physically punished are at a far higher risk of experiencing maltreatment and abuse by parents because over time, parents may feel the need to escalate and inflict more and more pain in order to elicit the same response. A 16-year-old girl told Childline, "When I was younger and misbehaved, my mum gave me a warning and put me on the naughty step. Then when I got to 5 to 12 years old, it was a tap or a little smack. But now it can be a proper smack, or there was an occasion where she pulled my hair and I fell to the floor and she continuously hit me. I don't want to get mum in trouble, but I can't carry on being afraid of her." Studies have also found that physical punishment leads to higher levels of aggression directed against parents by their children. Violence begets violence, and teaching children from a young age that violence is an acceptable way of channeling stress and frustration has consequences for all of us in society. It also has a pronounced impact on the children themselves. We know from research conducted by the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health that children who are physically punished are almost 3 times more likely to experience mental health problems than those who aren't. We know that physical punishment of children is linked to substance misuse, antisocial behaviour and slower cognitive development. While the majority of parents do not use physical punishment and its use is declining over time, more than 1 in 5 10-year-olds have still experienced it. This amendment is not about criminalising parents. No one wants to stop a parent from protecting their child who's about to reach for a hot kettle or cross a busy road. Of the many countries that have introduced a ban, there has been no evidence that it has led to an increase in prosecutions. Instead, changing the law is about giving parents, children and professionals clarity, whilst improving the toolbox parents have to positively raise their child. This clause would remove the ambiguity created by the reasonable punishment defence that would allow children and adults to more readily come forward in reporting abuse. And by operating in a clearer legal framework, it also makes it easier for professionals like social workers to do their jobs in the best interests of children. This amendment won't on its own be able to stop cases like Zara Sharif's, but it will certainly ensure that the threat of violence many children face will no longer be given the pretence of legal cover. And we cannot afford to delay action on this. The NSPCC has seen a threefold increase in the number of child welfare calls mentioning physical punishment in the past couple of years. We need to act now to ban physical punishment so that we can ensure children are able to grow up free from abuse and harm, something I know is the priority of this government and is the purpose of the bill in front of us. Evidence from other countries show us that bans work. In Germany, for example, the percentage of young people subjected to physical punishment fell from 30% to 3% after they introduced a ban in 2002. Given that 71% of adults believe that physical punishment is unacceptable, it seems to me that sooner or later we will have to change the law. My challenge with this amendment is, why not sooner? Why don't we commit to ending this abuse today? Children won't thank us for waiting. Future generations will not look kindly on our inaction, and nor should they. We have the evidence, we have the power, we have the time. We have the ability to act, and we should, to protect all our children. Thank you.
Hear, hear. Damian Hinds.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And it's a pleasure to be able to join in this important debate today, as it has been to serve on the Bill Committee. And may I say, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm very pleased that we have 2 days to debate this bill at report, because really it is actually two bills, which are very different in character. And in the first bill, part one of the bill, which we are debating today, there is a very great deal that I think all of us in this House agree upon. In fact, quite large parts were in our previously published bill, and some very important material, very important provisions covering children in care, covering special educational needs, covering child protection, and so on. Of course,
I know right at the beginning of his comments, but he speaks with huge levels of authority given his previous roles. And as a fellow Hampshire MP, he just mentioned special education needs. Would he agree with me that in Hampshire we benefit from excellent services for our local schools, particularly when it comes to special education needs, but demand has doubled in the last few years? And would he support my campaign to save Henry Court Community College in Fareham Waterlooville, which is under threat of closure? And if it's going to be closed, could it not be better diverted to special education needs to serve the local community?
Well, I am grateful to my right honourable friend and near constituency neighbour in Hampshire. She makes a very important point, and I'm sure she is running a very, very effective campaign. Of course, we look to the government to come forward with what we know is going to be a very broad, very large special education needs reform package. I think we don't yet know what is going to be in that and what the implications are. Of course, we all want children to be able, where it's right for that child, we want children to be able to be educated in a mainstream setting where they can benefit from that, but we also know that some children, for them, it is right to be in special school, and having the full range of provision is incredibly important. Madam Deputy Speaker, there's a great deal in this bill that I could speak about, and we did speak about in committee, but in pursuit of brevity, as I know you would wish me to, I'm going to limit myself to talking about two aspects today. One thing which is in the bill, and one thing which is conspicuous by its absence. The thing that's in the bill, and this is so it's a peculiar thing to bring to debate on the floor of the House of Commons, because it's something that I haven't yet heard anybody disagree with. And there is no amendment down to speak to, although to remain orderly, I can speak with reference to Government Amendment 114, which is right next to it in the legislation. But I speak neither in favour nor against the principle of what I'm about to say, but for what I think is an important reason. And that is that actually, in this House, sometimes it is precisely with measures where there isn't disagreement that the greatest dangers lie. Because this House, with its oppositional layout, thrives on people finding holes in what's being proposed and objecting to them. And when everybody's sort of saying the same kind of thing, there's a real danger that things get through without the proper attention. And I haven't yet said what I'm referring to, have I? So the thing I'm referring to are the provisions on unique identifiers. And a couple of speakers have already mentioned about the importance of this. And the Honourable gentleman from Bedfordshire was talking about the number of serious case reviews that you come where, in fact, almost invariably, serious case reviews, when they're identifying the problems that have occurred, a lot of that centres around the lack of proper sharing of data. Different agencies both knew the same child but didn't join together what they knew about the same child to be able to act in their best interest. And of course, the having an in the technical, in the systems world, it would be called an index term, which is a terrible way to refer to a child, but how we have a unique identifier for every child so that everybody knows when they are talking about that same individual child is very important. The Honourable Lady, Right Honourable Lady who chairs the Select Committee talked about the potential for this area to be, I think the phrase she used was genuinely transformational. And I think all of that is true. So Clause 4 allows for the creation of a single unique identifier for children and to introduce new duties around data sharing. So here's my worry, though. Sometimes when we legislate, something sort of passes through without too much debate, and then about 2 or 3 years later, all sorts of other things start happening. And when you query why they're happening, people say, well, you all voted for this, you passed a law about it. And perhaps some of these are some of the consequences. I think something along those lines might have happened around the regulation on GDPR, for example, and some of the things that we now see coming through in terms of rules around children's social media use and ages. So I think with this creation of the single unique identifier, this is a massive change, actually, in the way we keep records on people in this country, and potentially the way to join up different databases with implications for great positive implications for some things, like for child safety, but also other implications around privacy and data security and so on. And it's been suggested, Madam Deputy Speaker, that it will be the NHS number that will be the unique identifier used for a child. And at first glance, that seems an obvious and sensible thing to do. You yourself, Madam Deputy Speaker, were a DWP minister, and you will know that in the past, various projects have come forward with proposing to have the national insurance number as a unique identifier for adults. And that has also seemed at the time to be a sensible and clever thing to do. But actually, when you prod it further, it turns out that the national insurance number database is not perfect. And I'm afraid the NHS number database may not be either. And it just wasn't designed for this kind of purpose. So I'm not obviously, we're not going to have a big debate about this today, but I think over time, and they may do in the other place in talking about this bill, but over time I think we are going to have to really unpack what this whole new system may imply. So is it, I mean, for a start, is it talking about using the existing NHS database and just using the as I say, the index term, the unique identifier for individuals? Or is it talking about taking those numbers and putting them into a new database, a new system, which would have quite significant cost and time implications? If it is in the current NHS database, what does that imply for things like there's been a different debate going on about AI and the use of being able to take large amounts of data to use for academic research and so on. What is the implication of having this huge database of potentially every child in the country, potentially linked to all sorts of other databases with things about them for that kind of research? How secure is the system? I think we can probably safely say that the system won't give the same number to two different children, but I'm not 100% certain that we can say totally confidently that the same one child couldn't at different times in their life have different numbers, particularly with immigration and re-immigration, change in family structures and so on. And what does that mean for this system? More broadly, though, once you have this unique identifier and a national database of this sort, you could use it for quite a few other things other than child protection. And some of those things many of us in this House might think are pro-social things and worth pursuing. Like, for example, we have been having other debates about age verification and the use of electronica and social media. And such a database would be probably the most reliable system we have for under 18s in terms of their identity potentially. And then what about after age 18? Because if you've grown up with this database and with a number and identifier attached to you, that doesn't disappear just because you pass the age of majority. And so in theory, you could carry on having a linked database that potentially links up child protection sources, NHS sources, police, national computer. I mean, who knows what all you could join up? And then you might find that you have a system of national identity cards without having tried that in the first place. The Honourable Lady.
Right, Honourable Member for giving way. And he's raising a number of technical considerations about the implementation of a project which is no doubt very ambitious in his scope. But does he hear the cries from parents of children with SEND who are so weary about having to tell their story again and again and again to different parts of the system that are supposed to help them, but are currently hampered from doing so for exactly this want of the information about a child being held in a single place? And does he not think that, ambitious though this project is, and the technical considerations are important, it is worth delivering and worth giving parents the confidence that in this House we will scrutinise it and do that job, but there will be big gains to be had from pursuing this course of action?
Damian Hinds.
I think she was here in the first 2 or 3 minutes of my speech, but I think that's broadly what I said, was that there is obviously, in fact I quoted her as talking about the transformational potential of this measure and the importance of it, but said that, I mean, I don't want to go through it all again, but said that sometimes the danger is when we all agree on something, that is when there are most risks of unintended consequences. And then said, well, maybe we won't talk about all this today, we don't have to debate today, but I think the government will have to come back probably multiple times to consider, and for Parliament to be able to consider all of the potentially much wider implications of creating such a database. So I think not for the first time in our lives, we are not a million miles away from one another. The other thing I wanted to talk about, Madam Deputy Speaker, in a less consensual tone, is the thing which is glaringly obvious its absence from the bill, and that is, of course, new clause 36, as put forward by my honourable friend. And there are three parts to new clause 36 on mobile phones and social media. The first two, that the chief medical officers should be commissioned to report, and the government will conduct research on the effects of social media on children and young people. Of course, these are things directly are in the bill brought forward by the honourable member from Whitehaven that we were discussing here a couple of Fridays ago. The third thing is something which was in that wider package, as colleagues will remember, but is not in what the government has has agreed to, and that is to have a phone ban during the school day. And so that is, I suppose, the point of contention. Although, of course, I know there is something on which many colleagues across the House, many honourable members in the Labour Party do agree. Now, of course, there are limits to the approach, and it's an argument always made. We say, well, why not ban mobile phones in school? They say, well, what about out of school? And of course, that is true, but that's not a reason not to do that part of it. But I readily admit that most online harm happens outside of school, and we know from research, including the recent Birmingham University research study, that having a school ban doesn't necessarily reduce the total amount of time that young people spend online. It just displaces some of it. So that doesn't necessarily improve things like sleep, which is a big worry for teenagers, and nor does it address wider things on attention span, eyesight, and so on. But rules are still important, and both for the sake of the children, but also for the sake of the schools. There are three things in recent years which have changed the context for behaviour in schools. One is a set of things which happened around COVID and a sort of an attitudinal shift which has seemed to happen to a large extent throughout our society. The other two things are vapes and phones. And of course, vapes are banned. There is a universal ban on vape school. That doesn't mean they never get through, but you are not allowed to vape in any state secondary school in this country. Phones has been the other thing. And we know that even if you have and I say we know because it applies to like us as well, if you have a phone in your pocket, even if it's not in front of you and you're looking at the screen, it is still something of a distraction because you know that it could buzz at any time. In fact, you might be wondering if it's going to buzz at a certain time, if someone's going to reply to you or comment on your post or whatever it might be. And I think, that the school day in its entirety should be devoted to being the school day. And that doesn't just mean lessons and learning things, although that is the primary aim, but it's also to do with being with friends and just being a child, being a young person and growing up without those distractions. I've been waiting.
Tristan Osborne. Can I thank the honourable member for giving way? Can I confirm that he said it was a rite of passage that young people as young as year 6 and 7 should be allowed to have a mobile phone, and it was in the gift of their parents to decide? And last year, did he not suggest that we should wait until the guidance given by government should be fully reviewed and understood before we went for an outright ban? Can I ask why he's changed his mind?
I don't know if he's been reading misquotes.com again, but I did not say what he just said I said. I think he's probably referring to an interview from years ago where I said it has become something of a rite of passage that between years 6 and 7, the great majority of children get given a mobile phone. That is true, and is not at all what he just said that I said. So of course they will.
I think the right honourable member for giving way. Just on a point of fact, it is coming from a mobile phone, but I think as it will evidence that they are important in doing your research, talking about quoting. On the 19th of February 2024, when the Right Honourable Gentleman was the Minister of State for Schools, a press release came out from his department that said mobile phones are set to be prohibited in schools across England. On the Honourable Member's website, on the 29th of February, there was an article that said, this latest article by the Honourable Gentleman for the Herald and Post follows the decision to ban mobile phones in schools. The reason I raise that point is that previously the members opposite had made the argument that they were already banning mobile phones in schools. Is it not the case that they were posturing then just as they're posturing now?
Damian Hinds.
He didn't consult with his friend over there because he just made a sort of slightly contradictory point. I'm coming on to this. We did issue non-statutory guidance that mobile phone use should be prohibited during schools. I think that was the right thing to do. And we maintained an option. I don't know if it's further down the thing on the whatever webpage he was looking at. We said we maintained an option. I personally said we maintain an option to make this guidance statutory. And now that time has come because it hasn't been sufficiently effective in its current form. I do think it was the right thing to do. He wanted to give way again.
Luke Murphy.
I thank the right honourable for giving way. It wasn't just any website, it was in fact his website. And it was a direct quote. My point wasn't necessarily to do with my colleague's point. My point was the right honourable gentleman, when he was Minister of State for Education, for schools rather, said on his own website and the government's website, described it as an outright ban. No ifs, no buts. It was described by the previous government as an outright ban. It was posturing then, it's posturing now.
It's not posturing now. We issued non-statutory guidance that, with respect, there are different levels. There is non-statutory guidance, there's statutory guidance, there's primary legislation. And we have been, as I say, we have had, by the way, I first had to deal with this question in 2019. And on that occasion, we decided not to issue a ban. We had a big discussion about this, I recall, in the legislative committee. I'm not totally sure that was the right approach at that time, but that was what head teachers in particular, that seemed to be the view. And in you were quite right, then I was back at the DFE, we introduced non-statutory guidance, and I believe the time has come to write that into legislation. And if you'll give me a chance, I will say why. It is a perfectly legitimate question to say, well, even if something should be banned, why not just let the schools decide? Because schools know their pupils better. And this is an argument I've made myself many, many times over the years about many, many different things. But both the Labour Party and ourselves, and us, we both find ourselves in exceptionalism territory. For the members of Parliament opposite, they say, well, don't tell schools what to do, leave it up to individual head teachers. Have they read the rest of this bill? This bill goes into the most extraordinary level of detail, prescribing things, individual things that schools must do, taking away academy freedom, specifying the exact length of breakfast that is going to be given, and saying you may not have more than 4 items of of school uniform if you're a secondary school, and if it includes tie. But if you're a primary school, you may not have a tie. I mean, all manner of detailed specifications, except on this one thing. And I grant you, Madam Deputy Speaker, that in the mirror image it is also true that we believe in general you should leave things entirely up to individual schools who know their children best, but that this should be an exception. And as that honourable gentleman was just saying, in 2019 we decided, well, as opposed to this one, I wasn't being rude, we decided not to issue that guidance, but in 2024 we did, and it was very clear at the time that there was an option to make it statutory if required. And since then, the world has kept on changing. And my honourable friend on the front bench was talking about the continued development, sadly, tragically, of mental ill health among children and young people. And and we had this debate in the private members' bill session a couple of Fridays ago, although proving causality perfectly is incredibly difficult, and we'll probably never be able to do it. I don't know about other colleagues here, but I don't meet many people, particularly not teachers, who seriously doubt that there is a major causal link between the two things.
But I'm glad your friend, not least with his detailed experience within the department, is speaking eloquently as ever on this topic. But just before we move off the interventions from the bench opposite, is he, like me, enjoying this slight irony of them arguing on an issue of consistency when, having promised farmers no inheritance tax, waspy women, winter fuel, northern national insurance, and so many other areas, consistency doesn't seem to be a priority for them?
Damian Hinds.
My friend, as ever, makes a very compelling point, if I might say so. Madam Deputy Speaker, you'll be pleased to know, I am coming to a close. But I, of course, will take it as
Member for giving way, and he knows where I stand and what my views are on this issue. I would really ask the honourable member if he would outline what has changed between February 2024, when he said no to a ban of phones in schools, or reserved the right for statutory but did not bring in statutory.
Could I just suggest gently to right honourable and honourable members that we are meant to be debating the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill report stage, the amendments and new clauses. Damian Hinds.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I apologise. Of course, indeed we are. I think, in fairness to the honourable lady, I think there is a connection. But what I would say, and it's very important to say, we did not say no to a ban in 2024. We said we're going to start with non-statutory guidance with the option to make it statutory. And yes, children's usage of mobile phones has continued. And actually, if you look at the different surveys, so people say, well, they're banned in all schools anyway. Yes, it is true. I mean, I doubt there's a school in the whole country give me one sec. I doubt there's a school in the whole country who says, yeah, it's okay, just whip out your phone in the middle of the English lesson. Of course not. Everybody has various restrictions. But if you look at the survey data, and there is a bit of a hierarchy, whether you like listen to ministers, head teachers, classroom teachers or kids, but if you look the further down that list you go, the more you hear about people saying, no, actually, phones are about, and particularly in breaks and lunchtime. And that, to me, is part of the school day. It's not just about lesson time. The Honourable Gentleman.
I thank you for giving way. I visited Kent College in my constituency on Friday, and they've recently instituted a ban where the phones are collected up in the morning, put into pouches, and then at the end of the school day, the children can go and get them back. They've also found it very beneficial for collecting lost property because they attach it to the cages that have the phones in. Is the right honourable member aware of any cases of any schools where a ban has been instituted and has been seen to have negative outcomes rather than positive ones?
Well, I think he makes a very powerful point and makes it very, very effective. And of course, this Joan, there will always be arguments that you need exceptions for this case and that case, but you can have exceptions, right? I mean, school head teachers are pretty good at knowing when you need to make an exception to a general rule. Look, I would argue that it is helpful to have a national policy in this specific area. It does not preclude children with a special educational need or young carers being able to have an exception. And crucially, it also doesn't preclude children where the school wants and where the parent wants to be able to have a phone coming to and from school, which I think is something that parents often think about for safety. But as in the case he mentions with the pouches or lockers, there are various ways of dealing with this. And I have noticed the shift. A couple of years ago, some people argued against the principle of it. Now, the only real argument, I don't say it's a trivial point, but the only real argument I hear coming back is the cost. That to buy pouches or buy lockers will have a big cost. Well, if that is the thing we're arguing about now, that is material progress, and I would argue it's time for us to stop talking about whether and start talking about how.
Dame Siobhain McDonagh.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And through you, can I wish all members of the House a very happy St Patrick's Day. I rise to speak on Amendment New Clause 14. New Clause 14 is not brain surgery and is not new or exciting, but it is an essential part, I believe, of how we should begin to approach the enormous problem we have with children living in temporary accommodation miles away from their home borough, their school and their doctor. The honourable gentleman on the front bench for the opposition said earlier that he thought we would look back at the issue of mobile phones in schools and think, what were we thinking about to allow it to happen? I think we should already be thinking, how did we get ourselves into the position of having tens of thousands of children in temporary accommodation, almost exclusively in a terrible state of repair, miles away from anybody who is watching them? Many of these families are not just homeless, some are, but many are the most vulnerable in our community. Children with special needs, children and families who experience great difficulty with day-to-day lives and who have disrupted families and who move frequently and who just find things very difficult. As of right now, there are 164,040 children living in temporary accommodation. On average, 54 children every day
from homeless families are placed in temporary accommodation. In London, which is the area that I understand best, 1 in every 21 children are living in temporary accommodation. So at least one in every school class. And if it is a school in central London, in inner London, you could find 50 or 60% of the children living in temporary accommodation. Certainly that is the case in an article last year in the Sunday Times, which identified Harris Peckham as having 60% of their children in temporary accommodation. And that school, like all the schools in the Harris Federation, try and do their very best for these very large numbers. And they have actually set up a drop-in centre within the school to allow parents to take their children to school, spend the day in school, and then go home with them in the evening. We as MPs and constituency MPs probably understand a lot more closely than most in our communities just the impact of what is going on. In Merton, we have approximately just under 700 families in temporary accommodation. That is probably the lowest in London. But to me, it is an extraordinary number that I worry about every day and every night and every advice surgery. 80% of those families are placed outside the borough. When they are placed somewhere outside the borough, the only notification, 2 notifications, the council are required to place. That is 1 with the receiving borough and 1 with the Department for Housing and Local Government. You don't have to inform the schools, you don't have to inform the GPs, and nothing happens. So there are all these boroughs taking on families that they know nothing of. Often, families don't want their GP to know because they worry about being removed from their list, and they worry if they are removed from the list, that means that their children will be removed from the CAMS list, the Children and Adolescent and Mental Health list, which we know can be as long as 12 months, may be removed from operation lists at local general hospitals, and generally displaced along with being misplaced in accommodation. But what it also means, which we probably consider far less, is it means that the health visitor doesn't know that they have a family with young children moved into their area. I have a very great friend, Debbie Fawcett, a Queen's nurse who is the homelessness health visitor to families in Merton. Part of her job is to regularly go to hostels, converted warehouses, converted office blocks in and around my constituency to find out where these children are. She has no notification. She simply walks round the blocks. She gets the families she already knows to grass up, to be her spies, to see if families are moving in. She has been known to run around after delivery drivers to see what flats they are going into, to see if she could find a baby. Often these families are placed in accommodation that is so small the children cannot learn to walk, are displaced from the support of grandparents or churches or other community groups, so desperately need Debbie's help, but she doesn't know they're there. In the case of schools, many schools, we will all know, provide support far beyond education, but provide help with food, with uniforms, with guidance to families in difficult times. At the moment, those schools do not know that those families are in temporary accommodation. And there is shame that is attached to being homeless and in temporary accommodation. So often parents don't want to tell the school. Often they struggle with heroicism to get to school. I know of many families who bring their children from Luton into Mitcham and Morden to keep the continuity of the school. They fear that if they tell the school will remove them from their list. And some of the most shocking things that happen from time to time is children with very high needs who receive special school transport to get to special schools that support children with a great deal of difficulties. The transport just gets cancelled when they are moved out of the borough. And families then have to negotiate with a council they do not know to see if they can get that transport back. There has to be a better way. There has to be better notification. It won't sort the problem of temporary accommodation, but it could just protect those families, could protect councils, and could protect us against a huge and terrible thing that could happen. In the bill, we rightly talk at length about children who are homeschooled. But let me tell you, living in temporary accommodation must be at least as risky as being homeschooled. Through the brilliant work of Dr. Laura Nielsen, who is a GP in Oldham, we know the terrible fact that 74 children died in temporary accommodation over 5 years, where the coroner said that temporary accommodation was a major factor. 58 of those 74 children were under the age of 1, and they died from sudden death syndrome, probably because they didn't even have a cot of their own. But there are far more children, Madam Deputy Speaker, who die, who live in temporary accommodation, but we can't make that causal link that it was the main reason for their deaths. We know that 80 children in 1 year, or 3% of the total of children who died that year, were living in temporary accommodation. How is it that we are not telling GPs, we are not telling schools that this is what is happening to the families and the children under their care? I do not believe it is beyond the wit of government to be able to rectify this. There are already, or should be, I am not claiming for a single second that all councils do this. I know they don't, and that is a problem in itself. But all councils should be sending notices to receiving boroughs, and all councils do, because the money depends on it, send notifications to the Department for Housing and Local Government. We are talking about a really expensive service here. In London, we spend £4 million every day putting these families in temporary accommodation. I am sure most members who have seen any of this accommodation will believe it is a terrible waste of taxpayers' money. But we do need to ensure that it is spent properly and safely, and that people know where the families are living and that they get whatever support they can. I know that the government have felt unable at this time to accept this amendment, but I hope they understand the spirit with which it is laid down and the importance that the all-party parliamentary group for temporary accommodation hold these recording factors, and I'm very pleased that the Minister has agreed that she and the other departments will look at this in a timely fashion, because we can't wait, because something terrible may well happen, and I don't want to feel it's on my conscience or any of our consciences that there was something that we could do to stop this from happening. I fully appreciate the only way this problem will really be sorted is by building more houses. But one important small step is to ensure that schools where homeless children attend know that they are in temporary accommodation, and that their GPs and their health visitors also know. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Carla Denyer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak on behalf of my party's Amendment 172, and I'll also say a few words to lend my support, cross-party support, to New Clause 8 and New Clause 3. To begin with Amendment 172, I truly welcome the important steps taken in this bill to strengthen the systems intended to keep children safe. Yet the bill fails to embed meaningful consideration of children's views. This means that critical decisions may be made at local and regional levels without consideration of the views and experiences of the children that they affect. It is concerning that the proposed requirement in the bill is only to seek the views of the child where the local authority thinks that that is appropriate. The NSPCC points out that this is weaker than the existing Children Act requirements to ascertain and give due weight to the wishes and feelings of the child in line with their age and maturity. In short, while there are so many good things in this bill, it inexplicably falls short of that gold standard, and so our Amendment 172 seeks to address that. The amendment will ensure that local authorities offering and facilitating family group decision-making must consistently seek to ascertain the child's views and to properly support them to engage where this is in their best interests. Now, importantly, the amendment also seeks to ensure that where attendance at a family group decision-making meeting may not be in the child's interests, which must, of course, include giving due weight to their wishes and feelings, identifying safeguarding concerns, that's not the end of the story, because even if the child is not in attendance, it requires the local authority to ensure that the child's views are sought and, where relevant, independently represented. This could be, for example, through an independent advocate, recognising the incredible work they do to support even the youngest children to be heard and participate where possible. So I hope the Minister will look at Amendment 172 seriously. Turning to New Clause 8 in the name of the Honourable Member for Lowestoft, I thank her for her years of work on this issue, and I want to reiterate that the Green Party supports putting equal protection into law for children. The physical assault of children is never acceptable, and we need to follow Scotland and Wales and urgently update our law. The Children's Commissioner, the NSPCC, the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health, and many others have been crystal clear, not least in the wake of the horrifying case of Zara Sharif, that children should be equally protected from assault. The Children's Commissioner makes the important point that equal protection from physical assault is not a so-called smacking ban. That term trivialises this issue and is misleading about the types of behaviour that would come under scrutiny through such legislation, wrongly implying the creation of a new offence. Equal protection would instead remove the defence currently available to parents and carers who've been charged with assault, which, by its nature, are some of the most serious cases of child maltreatment. I'd also like to say a few words in support of New Clause 3 in the name of the Chair of the Education Select Committee, the Honourable Member for Dulwich and West Norwood. There is strong cross-party support for a requirement for the Secretary of State to consult on and publish a draft national care offer to set minimum standards for local care offers. Indeed, my honourable friend, the Honourable Member for North Herefordshire, tabled a similar amendment at committee stage, is unfortunately not able to speak to it today due to being on Environmental Audit Committee business. All local authorities, as we've heard earlier in the debate, have to produce a local offer for care leavers, but currently the support they get is a postcode lottery. The great national offer would help support independent living into adulthood for all care leavers. Enhancing and improving support for all care leavers would involve an ambitious cross-government programme of work, but it would mean that for the first time there could be a clear list of statutory entitlements care leavers can access. They should mirror the support that many young people receive from their parents, including support with rent deposits, for example, or free transport. With the number of children in care at a record high, we simply must do more to support those leaving care. There is both a financial but also a moral case for the government to do this. Thank you.
Dr. Darren Paffy.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I rise to comment on a couple of the clauses here. Government new clauses 18 through to 22, and also new clause 3. Firstly, I very much welcome the new corporate parenting duties and the values that these add to the bill and to the activities of authorities up and down this country. It adds to the bill because this is a bill about boosting standards in schools and creating opportunities. It's a bill about children getting the best start in life and making sure that there are clear protections for those young people. And crucially relevant to this, it's about stopping children and young people from falling through the cracks in the system, and that's where these new clauses really do add value. So in addition to the unique identifier that this debate has considered, joining up services to help children and young people, the overhaul of children's social care, which is long overdue, started by capping excess profits and ensuring collaboration, making sure every pound counts towards getting the best for children, and the measures to support kinship carers and care leavers mentioned elsewhere in the bill. All of these are crucial, but it is also crucial to strengthen what children in care can expect authorities to do to secure good outcomes for them. I previously led children's services as Cabinet Member in Southampton, and that was during a time where we needed to make huge strides forward to improve how we supported children and young people. And I know from that experience what rests on those services which are provided. They make or break opportunities for the young people who are looking to us for care. And so where this bill now includes accommodation in the local offer, that is welcome. That makes good on a commitment to guarantee care leavers a place to live. And now with government new clause 18, this sets out those wider responsibilities for authorities. Because the reality is the barriers faced by care experienced young people are greater than for most of their peers. And there is a likelihood that good outcomes will be far harder for them to secure. So it's right for authorities to do more, and more in good, sensible collaboration. What does that mean? What does that look like? It's couched in, I guess, unfortunate language in a sense. Parenting, a word pretty much everyone can relate to. Corporate, well, yes, but not in this context. So corporate parenting, I think we know within the sector what it means, but I do think it draws away potentially from how we should be thinking of it in terms of that family, the metaphor of the family, rather than an institution, a public service, an organisation with thresholds and goals. What that means is that a family gives love and attention to those in its care. It ensures a warm, safe place to live, which echoes the comments of my honourable friend from Mitcham and Morden. It's about getting them in front of a doctor or a dentist at precisely the moment they need it. And that support, we know, doesn't stop when kids leave home. As a father of teenagers and a small one, I've not yet faced that moment where they stay at home. But I know that eventually, if and when they do leave, I won't suddenly say, well, you're someone else's issue now. And therefore, corporate parents cannot and must not do the same. When kids leave home, parents continue to help them out. If, for example, that family's got a family business, they give first dibs on a job or a training opportunity to that child. That is what councils do as corporate parents. They act as guarantors. They can help with university or apprenticeship costs. In short, they fight for those young people, and they act as one family. They don't pass the buck and say, it's not my problem. And that's really what corporate parenting must be about across all government organisations and other authorities. Having worked closely with young people in care, I know that far too many of them feel like they are let down by systems that are there to protect them. They do often fall through the cracks. And so this new Clause 18, while not a magic wand, it is another right and important step in the right direction. It says that this is a government that gets it, that we understand what care experienced young people face. For too many of them, that looks like constant moves from house to house, from placement to placement, school changes, lack of housing often when leaving care, or certainly appropriate housing, different parts of the system not talking to each other. Therefore, what this addition to the bill does is act to change that experience for the better and make that journey through care into adulthood as supported as we can. I would ask ministers to perhaps comment on how they see best practice on corporate parenting being promoted in the statutory guidance where possible. But I really look forward to seeing a greater joined-up, child-focused work among all agencies as a result of this additional measure in the bill. And finally and secondly, I make some comments on new Clause 3, presented in the name of my honourable friend, the member for Dulwich and West Norwood. This was an issue that came up in the Bill Committee. I spoke in support of the principle of seeing a national care leaver offer come forward. I am really pleased to see this proposal here. In committee, I accepted and very much supported and backed the intentions of the Minister to drive forward strong cross-department collaboration to support care experienced young people. I know that on the issue of the corporate parenting amendment, they've listened and introduced that. You live and learn in this place, so I figure there's no harm in pressing again ministers to perhaps consider doing the same on the national care leaver offer. Whatever happens and whatever shape this bill goes forward, I know that there is enough in it to make this a real moment of progress and pride when we vote in support of it at third reading, and I call on honourable members across this House to do the same.
Yeah. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. During the second reading debate, I spoke about the role of supported lodgings, but I also spoke about the impact of the bill on well-meaning and responsible parents who, for a variety of reasons, choose to home educate their children and who will be disproportionately impacted by this legislation. Now, I realise this is tomorrow's business. It's in part 2 of the debate, but I'm on a public bill committee tomorrow, so I just want to get on record my support for the amendments 193 to 198 brought by the Conservative Education team, which all seek to tackle the current hammer blow that the bill applies to home educating families. However, today I must speak to part 1, and I appreciate the slight off-topic that I have just done. Clauses 7, 8 and 9 are seeking to further support those who have been in the care system to assure a statutory basis for their support to the age of 25. Now, like the member from Southampton Hitchin, as a former member of a corporate parenting panel as a counsellor, I have over the years met many young people who are looking for support and security as they start their transition to adulthood. And I should at this point declare an interest as a member of Plymouth City Council, but I feel it would be right at this point in time to share an innovation that they've been doing recently. And we've got a really great history of cross-party working as a corporate parenting panel in that council. But they have just instituted paying for the prescriptions and providing additional housing support for over 18-year-olds. And the point that's particularly clever is that they are charging back to the ICB, the Integrated Care Board, for the cost of those prescriptions. So I think that's just a good illustration of what is already going on out there, but is the sort of thing that we could build on. And indeed, when I was a member of the corporate parenting panel, I felt really strongly that actually a good way forward to get a national recognition and a national provision, as the honourable member from Southampton Hitchin has said,
would actually be potentially to pursue something like a care leaver covenant, a bit like we have a veterans covenant. So it's just this almost this expectation that I know we've sort of touched around the edges of in terms of jobs and housing and homelessness, but something that's not quite over the top, but is something that there's already an implication and an understanding of what we might mean by that from that veterans illustration that could be extended to care leavers. So I've obviously met, as I said, many who are looking for that support, and I've got a particular interest as a result in that transition to adulthood. I think we can stand here and talk about young people right the way from birth to 25, but for me there's always been something about that transition to adulthood that has resonated with me, and so being able to speak to that again today is particularly important. So specifically, I welcome the government's confirmation during the committee stage that supported lodgings will be included in the legislation's statutory guidance as a form of accommodation to be considered by local authorities. Having highlighted the value of supported lodgings to young people in my second reading speech and seen the evidence that Home for Good and Safe Families provided to the committee, I remain convinced that they are a valuable option for young people and should be utilised more. Furthermore, I know that the fostering network were keen to see the legislation go forward and more explicitly provide for staying put, not just staying close. That is extending the opportunity for young people to remain with their foster carers at the age of 18, because ultimately that's one less move that they may need to do if they don't have secure homes after the age of 18. But I'm not sure that that is in the final bill. That remains to be seen. I suppose it could be an amendment in the House of Lords, but that will in the other place, but we will have to see where we end up. However, considering this, therefore, it is disappointing that Amendment 184, tabled by my colleagues, did not make further progress with the bill. An amendment was tabled to ensure that staying close support takes account of the views of young people, requiring local authorities to take account of the wishes of the relevant young person when providing staying close support to allow for continuous improvement. It also included a requirement to keep a record of those wishes to ensure that the young person's views and desires are protected from the loss of knowledge when personnel change. And it does seem, there's many inconsistencies in this bill that we've heard about already, but this feels like another inconsistency. We're keen for a young person to have a number that takes them all the way through school, but we're not keen to ensure that their records and their wishes as care experienced young people are followed through and protected in that way. And as I'm sure many of us will agree, it's all well and good for us to stand here today, and in my case I'm very fortunate. I can say that supported lodgings should be promoted, but as someone who has not been in the care system, I can only speak from the experience of receiving continuous support of my own family from the age of 18. But it's important to say I also had choice at that stage, and that's why it's so important that as corporate parents we ensure that that is continued. Effectively, my life was based around my choices, which meant going away to university, but I also got to come home every holiday. And although I may have lost my bedroom to my younger brother, I still had that home, and that was there right through until I moved to London for my first job. But indeed, I did actually even move back again in my early 30s, so I have that value of that home that we are saying should be something that we provide for those who are care experienced. So it is essential that we recognise the value of choice for those care experienced who don't have the choices that we may have, but if we can at least listen to them and ensure their views and preferences are carried through the system, that transition to adulthood, putting them in the driving seat would be beneficial to them. However, as I said, that amendment has not been taken forward by the government. Madam Deputy Speaker, Clause 7 strengthens the provision of advice and support for young people aged 18 to 25 who've been in the care system. Now, while I welcome the extension to the expectation of who local authorities support and how, it feels like a limited list, which seems a missed opportunity. Now, bear with me on this, because this is a reasonably long story and it doesn't directly relate, but it does at the end, and I think it's really important to put this before the House today. On Friday, Madam Deputy Speaker, a 33-year-old man attended my surgery who wanted to share his experience as someone who had been placed in care and then adopted. And unfortunately, this bill does not allow for his experiences. He was sexually abused as a baby by both of his parents and eventually removed from home. With hindsight, he was also neglected, and the impact of his life story means he has experienced homelessness, prison on more than one occasion, and ongoing mental health issues related to the trauma he experienced. These issues then extended into his adoptive life with a new mother who became an alcoholic and was physically abusive towards him. Now, as a young man, despite the odds stacked against him, he has settled down, has 3 children, is still with their mother, although he does say that's tough at times. But he acts as a facilitator for Andy's Man's Club in my constituency, has set up a support group and a podcast to help others like him. So on one hand, he's a success, but he highlighted a really clear issue, which I think it's important to raise today. He clearly articulated to me how he felt he had been let down by social services when he asked to see his care records, and this is where I believe his story links to the bill before us today. Regardless of the fact he discovered that there were two sets of records, his social services files and his adoption records, he received no support when he made a request to access his records. He was simply given the files by Devon County Council, and that was that. Now, having read 2 of the 5 files that he was given, which he found to be in a highly disorganised state, they weren't in order, things were all over the place, he had to stop, given their contents and the significant adverse effect it had on him. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, his case highlights the need, to me, for provisions like Clause 7 to go further in terms of the stay in close offer and to prompt a conversation about how we support those who have, through no fault of their own, experienced some of the most horrific early childhood experience. How can we be better able to formally support previously looked after adults as they continue their journey through life, particularly, and this may be the only thing we need to do because I appreciate we can't necessarily provide this support forever, but particularly when they access their social services records, because ultimately we don't know at what point in somebody's life they're going to do that. So young adults like my constituent are simply requesting that when they access their care records, they also receive a meeting with someone trained to explain what those records mean. His experience has been that his records contained details that were so distressing, but also included lots of technical language, which in his case, as someone who is not a social worker, means he doesn't actually understand what he's reading. Now, my constituent may be over 25 now, but his experiences, I don't believe, are age-related. So I would call on the ministers to ensure that how care records are shared is explored as guidance on the delivery of Clause 7 is finalised, because I think his story is pretty you can't really get away from that experience that he had, and it feels like quite a simple measure that could make an extraordinary amount of difference. Yes, of course.
I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way. She's making a powerful point here about the importance of accessing coherent and organised records. Would she also agree with me, though, that some of the reasons why we have disorganised records is because we've seen such a churn of social workers? And one of the causes of that is that our care system has relied extensively on excessive profiteering by external companies. The measures in this bill actually provide for a retention of care workers by making sure that we rule out excessive profiteering. Would she welcome that?
I thank the Honourable Member for his contribution. I'm going to reserve my judgment on the excessive profiteering because I'm not convinced that by stripping out that we are actually going to help the system, because ultimately what we need is a provision of service, and if people just leave the sector altogether, then we're not going to have social workers anyway. So I don't agree with him on that point, but I understand the link that he is making to what I was saying. So I welcome how far we have come in recent years to extend the support in areas such as housing and the provision of support up to 25 years old. But the bill is creating another cliff edge, I believe. So what more can be done to enable those who are impacted by the emotional and mental impact of their life in care as an adult to access trained support? And I wonder whether that is just something that we need to look further at. Now, to slightly change tack, Madam Deputy Speaker, talking of missed opportunities and indeed perhaps a lack of ambition, I fail to see how the government is not able to support the safeguarding of young people in school from the impact of mobile phones in the classroom by banning them. And I feel there's another inconsistency here, as has already been mentioned by my right honourable friend. Clause 24 limits the sale or the use of branded school uniform to remove peer pressure and reduce costs. But I find this to be completely inconsistent, because the Honourable Member, who's no longer in his place from Chatham and Aylesford, was using that as one argument, yet at the same time ensuring that young people had the ability to take their smartphone and their tablet into school. We'll talk about something that creates peer pressure and highlights that some can afford it and some cannot. I simply do believe that this is the government not wanting to support this amendment because it has been tabled from the Conservative front bench. And I do believe that actually we have to significantly look at what is best for young people and move away from party politics on this, and at least be consistent. Let's make sure that the legislation we are creating doesn't do one thing on the one hand and then something completely different on the other. So this is not about banning young people from using phones, and I don't believe that that's the state's role. That is a parent's role to choose if and when their children are able to use a phone. But it is about recognising the impact their presence can have during and immediately after, well, before, during and immediately after the school day. Now, there are some parents who recognise this themselves, those who will limit what their children can access on their smartphone, and those who are making the most of what some might refer to as a brick phone. I don't know if any of us had one of those in the room this afternoon, or as it's known today, a dumb phone or a non-smartphone. So there are now parents choosing to go back in time to give their children these really simple phones which enable them to call home on the way home, should they be a young carer, to have that phone in school with them. But it just removes all of that peer pressure, and to be perfectly frank, the difficulty that a lot of people find in parenting their children, having to actually say no to all of the demands. And, you know, I don't have children, but I have friends who do, and they're in that difficult 13, 14-year-old age group, and I know that the biggest fights they have are over what their children can access on their phones. If we, you know, made it so that it was less appealing to even have a smartphone in the first place, I think we would be doing a huge amount to facilitate parents as they try to do their difficult job in the modern times. So I don't believe this legislation would hinder anything. I believe instead it would protect children in school and promote focus and attention. And as I've said, it limits the peer pressure on both children and their parents for a small smartphone world. Finally, the bill as it stands also fails to grasp the role it could have played in strengthening safeguards and support for families experiencing domestic abuse. Now, I believe cross-party we have come a long way in how we deal with domestic abuse cases in this country, and legislation has been massively progressive over the last few years. And I particularly welcome how the previous government worked to recognise children as victims in their own right in domestic abuse cases. However, this bill, within its safeguarding provisions, could have gone further, in my view, and been used as an opportunity to do more to provide explicitly for children who experience male violence. We know that children are either victims themselves or are severely impacted by witnessing violence or coercion and control in the home. And I've mentioned this before, but there is now groups who work in and amongst tackling violence against women and girls and sexual violence in my home city of Plymouth, who are looking to move away from the language we use about violence against women and girls towards violence against women and children, specifically to recognise that threat and that need to do more to tackle how we look after children. So perhaps this bill could have provided an opportunity to do that. But however, Madam Deputy Speaker, we will have to leave that for another day. So in conclusion, the most underwhelming and unambitious bill for schools in history. Not my words, but those of Caroline, a teacher of 20 years' experience. So as the debate moves to part 2 of the bill tomorrow, Madam Deputy Speaker, I hope that there may be a glimpse of something brighter. However, probably pretty much like her, I remain unconvinced.
Lewelbuck. Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I refer members to my entry in the Register of Interests. I rise to speak to new clauses 43 to 47 in my name and that of my honourable friends. New clause 43 is yet another attempt to put my Healthy Start bill into law. When I first introduced the bill, 200,000 eligible pregnant women, babies and infants were missing out on Healthy Start vouchers. That's approximately £58 million from a scheme that is already budgeted for going unclaimed. These vouchers provide financial assistance in the form of a prepaid card to all under 18s who are pregnant, families with babies and children under the age of 5, and pregnant women claiming certain benefits. This is to help with the ever-increasing cost of fruit and vegetables, milk formula and vitamins. Just last year, the Child of the North APPG, which I chair, heard evidence that children in the North are more likely to die before reaching their first birthday than anywhere else in the country. It has been widely reported for some time now that parents in desperation have resorted to theft of baby milk and formula or having to water it down, which is not surprising considering that prices of baby formula are at historically high levels. As it stands, there is a lack of awareness about the scheme and the application routes are overly complex and very varied. The reason so many are missing out on the vouchers is that the system operates in an opt-out way, in an opt-in way, sorry, not an opt-out model. Auto-enrolment for all of those eligible would ensure maximum take-up of this essential nutritional safety net. The Healthy Start scheme was introduced by a Labour government. The current problems with it are the fault of the last government's management of the scheme. It is in this government's gift to solve those problems. Madam Deputy Speaker, new clause 44 relates to improving sibling contact for children in care. The Children Act 1989 requires local authorities to allow a looked-after child reasonable contact with their parents, but there is no parity of provision for a looked-after child's contact with their siblings or their half-siblings. If siblings cannot be placed together, they should have exactly the same rights to contact defined in primary legislation as they do with their parents. Those relationships that adults deem to be the most important for children in care are not the same as those that are most important to the children in care themselves. Government's own research has acknowledged that maintaining contact with siblings is reported by children to be one of their highest priorities. Having that relationship ripped away causes them anguish on many levels. And whilst the department doesn't collect statistics on siblings' contact levels, work in the past by the Family Rights Group shows that half of all sibling groups in local authority care are split up. Many of these siblings come from neglectful and abusive backgrounds. They state themselves that their only constant, positive, reassuring and enduring relationship is the one they have with their siblings. This is especially the case if they have been abused by their parents. Therefore, it cannot be right that our primary legislation gives more weight to a children's contact with those who have or may have caused them significant harm than it does with their siblings who are totally blameless. The guidance does exist in relation to sibling contact, but it is significantly opaque to be ignored. And it is ignored on a regular basis. And we all know in this House that guidance is no substitute for a clear duty. Madam Deputy Speaker, I first raised this in 2016. Every single minister that followed, and there were a lot of them, promised that the regulations would be amended. To date, those regulations have not been amended. To date, those children in care do not have contact with their siblings prioritised. This is robbing them of what they cite as their most important and most enduring relationship. New clause 45 seeks to rectify a clear inconsistency in the law, where children in stable foster placements can stay with their foster families until the age of 21 under the terms of the stay and put arrangements, but similar provisions do not exist for those children in residential care. We should not be presiding over a two-tier system where those in foster care receive more comprehensive support from the state than those in residential care. The Minister knows children in residential care often have complex needs and require an immense amount of support. That need for support continues when they leave care. One of the factors known to give them a better chance in life is to ensure they have suitable and stable accommodation. Staying close is not enough. Local authorities have a duty to ensure there is significant accommodation for looked-after children in their area. New clause 45 would introduce a similar duty to ensure sufficient accommodation for all care leavers up to the age of 21, not just those who are in foster care. Madam Deputy Speaker, I will now turn to new clauses 46 and 47. Just as children leaving residential care are treated differently to their peers in foster care, children aged 16 and 17 in residential care are also treated very differently to their younger peers. In 2021, the previous government introduced through statutory instruments provision to prohibit unregulated accommodation for children in care aged 15 and under, but not for those children aged 16 and 17. Later, in 2023, they introduced what they deemed as appropriate standards for supported accommodation for children in care and care leavers. These statutory instruments legitimised and encouraged the increasingly shameful practice of placing children in unregulated, unsafe hostels, bed and breakfasts, shared homes and caravan parks. Some children were even placed in tents on campsites. All those settings have left them without any support, vulnerable to criminal abusers, drug gangs and sexual exploitation. The changes that followed in 2023 to supported accommodation for children aged 16 and 17 included no requirement to provide these children in care with any care at all, no requirement for qualified staff or managers to be present in their accommodation, no requirement for independent monthly monitoring of that accommodation. Ofsted is only required to, on a 3-year cycle, look at a small proportion of these accommodations. They also didn't prohibit corporal punishment, as is the case in children's residential homes. And these changes still allowed the putting of children into care in caravans, barges and boats, or accommodation with vulnerable adults and prison leavers. As of March 2024, the latest statistics that I have are that up to 50%, nearly 900,000 of 16 and 17-year-olds in care were living in this careless, bleak accommodation. I have raised before in this House that 50 children we know of in unregulated accommodation have died, the details of which are rightly not fully known or in the public domain. But the children I've spoken to themselves have said they are literally surviving, they are not living, they are not being allowed to prepare for adulthood, they are not in education, and they are not in employment. They are literally surviving hour by hour. I remain deeply saddened that we did not object to these changes at the time, despite my efforts. Our 16 and 17-year-olds in care have been abandoned for far too long. My new clauses 46 and 47 will give them the support and care that they so desperately need and desperately want, the support and care that the previous government ripped away from them. Madam Deputy Speaker, whilst I've been in this place long enough to know that the Minister is not going to accept all of my new clauses today, I remain ever confident and hopeful that he will work with me, consider these new clauses very deeply and very carefully as the bill progresses to the other place and eventually returns back to this chamber.
Lee Dillon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And as the son of a lady from Limerick, can I offer my mum, my wider family and everybody in the House a happy St Patrick's Day. I rise to speak in support of 2 new clauses, Madam Deputy Speaker. First, new clause 13, tabled by the Honourable Member from South Devon, which requests a review of adoption support services offered by local authorities, and it requires the government, within 12 months of passing the Act, to conduct a review of the adequacy and effectiveness of those services. This will give those providing adoption services and those receiving them comfort to know that they are indeed adequate, and hopefully increase the confidence in adoption services and increase the take-up of those offering their homes to children in need. And the second amendment I wish to speak to, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I declare an interest as a member of the Temporary Accommodation, APPG, is new clause 14, tabled by the Honourable Member for Mitcham and Morden. That new clause has the support of 35 colleagues from both Labour and Liberal Democrat benches. And the new clause requires local authorities to notify the child's school and the child's registered GP practice of the household's homelessness status. Now, during this debate, we've heard from the Honourable Member from Mitcham and Morden about the impact of living in temporary accommodation. But this new clause will help with detecting any issues around learning or health outcomes as a result of living in temporary accommodation. Accommodation that the chair of our own Housing Select Committee has mentioned in this place before as being no longer, sadly, that temporary. And hopefully it will help in learning the lessons of the 74 children that have died within temporary accommodation and that being classed as a contributory factor to their deaths. I commend both these new clauses to the House.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as a former teacher, I know firsthand the importance of safeguarding and ensuring that every child has the opportunity to thrive, regardless of their background or circumstances. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, that's why I wholeheartedly welcome or want to respond today to the new clauses 18 to 22 in the Children's Wellbeing Bill that focuses on corporate parenting, as I believe that they represent a vital step in protecting vulnerable children and enhancing their overall well-being. These amendments shift the responsibility for the welfare of children, particularly those in care or at risk, from being solely the part of a single agency duty. And as my honourable friends from Hitchin and Southampton Hitchin so eloquently spoke and gave examples in their roles before coming to this place, to a much-needed collective one that includes local authorities, social services, healthcare providers and educational agencies. The idea of corporate parenting means that these services and agencies must come together to act in the best interest of children, much like a parent would. They are tasked with ensuring that children receive the care, protection and opportunities they need to grow, thrive and reach their full potential. Because as a teacher, I saw firsthand how crucial it is for agencies to work together. A child's welfare isn't just confined to the classroom. It's about providing them with a holistic support system that addresses their physical, emotional and psychological needs. The additional clauses will strengthen this bill and work to create an integrated approach where services must collaborate and share vital information to support children, meaning that duplicate work is reduced and also meaning that silo working will be minimised and that children are not ignored. Whether it's access to mental health services, education, housing or medical care, no child should fall through the cracks. Every child deserves to have their needs met, and this bill ensures that all agencies involved are jointly responsible for making that happen. This landmark reform to safeguarding children means no more empty words or lessons to be learnt, but real action and a government that is taking responsibility. And Madam Deputy Speaker, the need for these changes is clear. We've seen far too often the tragic consequences of what systems fail to collaborate or act quickly enough. Cases like that of Victoria Climbier, a young girl who suffered horrifically at the hands of her guardians, despite being in contact with multiple child protection agencies, highlight the devastating outcomes of such failures. Similarly, Madam Deputy Speaker, the case of Baby P, or Peter Connolly, is a heart-wrenching reminder that despite being known to authorities, children can still fall victim to abuse when systems don't work as they should. And as the Honourable Member from Woking spoke about his constituent, Zara Sharif, sadly, these are just few of the tragedies. And Madam Deputy Speaker, these tragedies should never have happened. And whilst we cannot change the past, we can and must ensure that we never allow such failures to happen again. New clauses 18 to 22 and this bill aims to prevent more children from being let down by the system. By making local authorities and agencies more accountable, it ensures that there is a shared responsibility for every child. It is about creating a proactive rather than a reactive system of child protection. And as my honourable friend from Southampton Hitchin noted, and I would also welcome examples of good practice of corporate care and for the government to explore this. We all know that children who have the support that they need are more likely to succeed. I have witnessed how small interventions, whether from a teacher, a social worker, a healthcare professional, can make a world of difference in a child's life. Joining these up can only enhance these sometimes small but often life-changing interventions. The new clauses are about ensuring that such interventions are not isolated, but instead are part of a larger picture, coordinated efforts to meet the needs of every child, especially those who are most vulnerable. I want to thank all of the honourable members' passionate and informed speeches today, and particularly those from these benches, because as the member from Mitcham and Morden said, we know and see the concerns and plights of the children in our constituencies firsthand. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Children's Wellbeing Bill marks a significant shift in how we safeguard children. The holistic, coordinated approach outlined in the bill and its clauses 18 to 22 particularly offer the best chance we have had in years to create a safer and more supportive environment for our children. Now is our opportunity to build a system where every child is truly protected and given the support they deserve. Madam Deputy Speaker, a vote against this bill is a vote against the safety of our children, their childhoods and their futures. And a vote against this bill means simply more words and more inaction. And shamefully, a vote against this bill will allow children to continue to slip through the cracks and to be let down. I urge all MPs to use their vote to pass this landmark reform and safeguard all children and ensure that they not only survive but thrive.
Bobby Dean.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak in favour of new clause 35 and Amendment 174, both laid in my name, as well as the amendments put forward by my honourable friend, a member for Twickenham. The Corporate Parents Forum was one of the more enjoyable committees I sat on when I was a local councillor, and I agree with the member for Southampton and Hitchin that it's quite a cold name for all the warm work that it does, and you get to see the dedication of social workers, the compassion displayed by foster carers and adoptive parents, and of course the resilience and the character of the young children themselves. But we all saw, probably in our work, that hard work was often undermined by a system that was holding back the people that cared from being able to care to their full responsibilities. I'm pleased to see that this bill is going to make significant progress in that regard, but there are still some areas where it could go further, and I intend to speak about a couple of them today. One area of particular interest to me is the so-called care cliff edge. If you are leaving the care system at 18, you are forced to go up so much faster than all of your peers. And this is an issue that I've raised before on the floor of the House, in particular in relation to the aid differential on universal credit, which impacts young care leavers far more than any other category. This bill does seek to improve the care cliff edge, and the staying close support requirements are in particular of interest to me, particularly up to the age of 25, that support being strengthened. But there is an anomaly, and it's on housing. I understand the government may accept that care leavers should not be regarded as becoming homeless intentionally, but my new clause 35 would go a step further and extend that priority needs status under the homelessness legislation to all care leavers up to the age of 25, regardless of all assessed vulnerabilities. Now, the bill currently has that covering young care leavers at aged 18 to 20, but that makes it out of line with the rest of support that's available to young care leavers. And given all we know about the vulnerabilities that care leavers have, and it's been spoken about in this chamber today, I don't think that we should be putting them in the position where they have to prove their vulnerability at this crucial crisis point. And last Friday, I was at a homeless shelter in my constituency, and I got to meet a young carer. He'd spent 8 months in a tent prior to arriving in that shelter, and he explained to me the story of how it happened. First of all, he was in supported accommodation before the age of 18, and just as he reached the age of 18, that home was shutting down. And so his sort of transition plan was completely undermined in that moment. And he sort of bounced about from place to place for the following few years. He's now just reached that crucial age of 25, but he's not received the support he needed in the last few years. And I think that this new clause 35 could help rescue people like him in the future. The other area of interest that I have is in kinship care. And I must admit, Madam Deputy Speaker, that I had not really heard of kinship care until a few years ago, but I grew up in kinship care. I was the eldest of 3 boys. My mum had me at 19, and times got pretty tough as a teenager, and things boiled over, and eventually the relationship with my parents broke down. And I left home, and I never went back. And as cock as I was at sort of 14, 15 years old, I couldn't have lived on my own. But luckily I had my grandparents there who stepped up to take me on. My nan and pops, as I knew them, helped sort of pick up the pieces and put me back on the straight and narrow. And I went from a boy that started to fall behind in school and drink a bit down the park to slowly sort of take my education more seriously and get my act together. And if it wasn't for my grandparents, I'm pretty sure that I wouldn't be standing on these green benches today. It wasn't easy for them though. They were on a state pension, they were in a council house, they didn't have a lot to give, But what they did have to give was love, guidance and support. And crucially, that was accepted readily by me because they already had my trust, they already had my respect, they had authority over me because they were my grandparents. And I think this is the real power of keeping care within the family. There are bonds that are ready-made, that are really difficult to replicate in any other form of care. And they provide the foundation that children need to thrive. And this bill is groundbreaking in respect to kinship care. I acknowledge that. But we have so few opportunities to make change in this area, and I'm determined to get it right the very first time. Now, my honourable friend, the member for Twickenham, has laid down amendments on kinship care leave, kinship allowances, extending the pupil premium, and prioritising school admits, all of which I have put my name to too, and I strongly hope that the government can find a way to support. But I've also laid down my own amendment, 174, which would ensure that kinship families are actively engaged in shaping and forming the local authority policies that are outlined in this legislation. We do this when developing policies for children with special educational needs, and I think it's a simple principle that there should be nothing about us without us. Kinship is a particularly complex form of care. There's lots of history to the relationships, and I think we need to appreciate those special nuances and listen to the kinship carers when developing policy as well, and make sure the authorities hear the voice of kinship families when designing the system to support them. Madam Deputy Speaker, I wish that my grandparents had lived long enough to see me take up this place on these benches. They would have been very proud. But I hope today that we can begin to say thank you to them and to the thousands of kinship carers like them by working towards the strongest possible rights and support. Thank you.
Neil O'Brien.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. With the leave of the House, we've had some superb speeches this afternoon. We had a brilliant intervention from the chair of the Select Committee, a very thoughtful speech, and she ended by talking about the welfare reforms that the government will be proposing tomorrow. And I couldn't help but think that we are proposing, one of the reasons we are proposing the ban on phones in schools is as part of a general drive to undo the damage that a smartphone childhood is doing to young people's mental health. And we can see that the driver of ballooning welfare claims of the kind that the government is really worried about is young people, and it's young people's mental health claims. And so if we want to really get serious about prevention, a good place to start is exactly what we are going to be voting on a few moments ago. And I am, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm a glass half full kind of person. So when I heard various honourable members opposite earlier on, perhaps the member for Hitchin would be an example, who they said they were going to be voting for the phone ban today. I could hear chinks of light in what they were saying about perhaps they were not changing their vote, but their mind was coming round to these things. My very right honourable friend for North East Cambridgeshire gave a great speech, including raising the challenge posed by the very large number of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children in the system, now a third of all looked-after children in some local authorities. The member for Woking gave a fantastic, powerful speech, including on safeguarding on his constituent Zara Sharif and the tragic case there. The member for Lowestoft, although we will have to disagree about the policy, gave a good speech arguing for the smacking ban. And my right honourable friend for East Hampshire raised really big, important questions about unique identifiers, something, as he said, we all agree on the principle, but actually getting this right is going to be crucial. One of the most important speeches today, I thought, was another excellent intervention from the right honourable member for Mitcham and Morden, who has talked good sense and given the government good advice on part 2 of the bill and on schools, but has also today proposed a very sensible measure which we support to make sure that the flow of information around the system is all it should be, and that the same kind of information that's being provided to the department is also provided to those working on the front line with children. My honourable friend from South West Devon gave a very bleak but also very important testimony, and her idea, I think, of a covenant was an important one. But we also ended on an excellent note with there were other good speeches that I haven't mentioned, but the honourable member for Carshalton and Wallington really powerfully made the case for kinship care. We, I think, are in powerful agreement on that, and I hope we'll make progress on it as the bill goes to the other place. But it was a wonderful thing, and he was completely correct that they would indeed be very proud to see him here.
Minister Stephen Morgan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I start by reiterating my thanks to all right honourable and honourable members from across the House for their thoughtful contributions on a range of amendments which I aim to cover as many as possible of in the time available. A key pillar of this government's reform of children's social care is to shift the focus towards early support to help families together, keep them together where this is possible. I will therefore begin with amendments concerning family group decision-making tabled by the Honourable Member for Bristol Central and the Right Honourable Member for Sevenoaks. Regarding Amendment 172, we agree that the voice of the child and their views are integral. In some cases, it may not be appropriate for the child to attend meetings. However, during family group decision-making, where appropriate, the local authority must seek the views of the child. Also, statutory guidance will set out that local authorities should ensure the facilitator has the right skills and training, and I'm confident that skilled professionals will engage the child in an appropriate way. Regarding Amendment 176, there is robust evidence that children can be diverted from care when family group decision-making is offered at the pre-proceeding stage. We also encourage local authorities to offer this process as early as possible in the child's engagement with children's services to support a family-first culture. Turning to Amendment 179, if a looked after child goes to live with a family member, the care planning regulations already require a care plan to be in place, and this must include arrangements to meet the child's needs and be reviewed at least every 6 months. It would be inappropriate to assume that every child going to live with a family member needs a child protection plan. It is right that we protect all children who are at risk of harm, but it's also right that we do not intervene in a family life where children are safe, loved and well supported. I turn to new clauses 25 to 28 tabled by the Honourable Member for Twickenham. I'd like to start by emphasising how much the government values kinship carers who come forward to care for some of the most vulnerable children in society who would likely otherwise be in care. And we recognise the challenges that many kinship carers face in continuing to access work alongside the pressures of raising a child unexpectedly. In October 2024, the government announced £400 million of new funding for kinship financial allowance pilot, and this will provide a weekly financial allowance to kinship carers to support them with additional costs incurred when taking on parental responsibility for their kin. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is the single biggest investment made by government in kinship care to date, and decisions about future rollout will be informed by robust evaluation. New Clause 25 would introduce a new right to kinship care leave. Now, employed kinship carers may already benefit from a number of workplace employment rights that are designed to support employees in balancing work alongside caring responsibilities. For example, unpaid parental leave for employees who have or expect to have parental responsibility, which are making a day one right through the Employment Rights Bill. We've also committed to a review of the parental leave system to ensure that it best supports all working families. Regarding new clauses 27 and 28, we're providing over £2.9 billion of pupil premium funding. Schools can direct spending where the need is greatest, including to pupils in kinship care. And as such, children may already be eligible for the highest admissions priority where they are or were looked after by the local authority. Lastly, the new section 22H7 inserts by clause 5 in the bill already says that a local authority must review and update its kinship local offer from time to time. This gives opportunities for the views and opinions of children living in kinship care and their carers to be taken into account. I hope the Honourable Member for Twickenham and Conchulton and Wallington and Sevenoaks are reassured by this. I turn to new clause 13, tabled by an Honourable Member for South Devon. Adoption is a vital part of our system, and it's important that we ensure that support is high quality. However, Ofsted already reports regularly on adoption support in local authority children's social care inspection reports, as well as on voluntary adoption agencies and adoption support agencies. Regarding new clause 3, tabled by my honourable friend, the member for Dulwich and West Norwood and the chair of the Select Committee, increasing support for care leavers is a key government priority. Clause 8 of this bill would build on existing provisions by requiring each local authority to publish the arrangements it has in place to support and assist care leavers in their transition to adulthood and independent living. This will include its arrangements for anticipating the future needs of care leavers in respect of accommodation. Relatedly, I turn to new clause 45, tabled by my honourable friend, the member for South Shields, to extend staying put arrangements. The proposed amendment is not needed. As part of the bill, we will require each local authority to provide eligible care leavers with staying close support where their welfare requires it. This means all eligible young people who leave residential care can be supported to find and keep suitable accommodation into adulthood. Turning to Amendment 184, I thank the Honourable Member for raising the important principle of local authorities listening to and responding to the wishes and feelings for eligible care leavers. As set out in committee, when assessing and providing staying close support, the local authority will be expected to have due regard to the accompanying duties regarding the creation and review of a young person's pathway plan. As part of this, the views of young people are expected to be considered. Also tabled by my honourable friend, the member for South Shields, I turn to new clause 47 and amendments 188 and 189 from the right honourable member for Sevenoaks. I welcome the opportunity to discuss the quality of care in and oversight of children's homes, and I welcome the opposition's support for a position that is implicit in their amendment that action needs to be taken to better equip Ofsted to deal with poor practice across children's homes. However, we do not believe these amendments are required. Introducing full inspection at provider group level would not be appropriate or a well-targeted way to use Ofsted resource. Clause 12 is deliberately designed in a way which supplements the existing robust regime for inspection of individual settings. This ensures Ofsted can take the quickest and most effective action to safeguard vulnerable children. Amendment 189 would give local authorities the power to issue an improvement plan notice to a children's home or for minor concerns or admin breaches following a Regulation 44 visit. This would add little value over and above what is already in place under existing regulations. It's also not clear that would constitute a minor concern, nor what regulatory action could follow, and it risks muddying the waters of accountability and responsibility. Lastly, there are already mandatory national minimum standards through the supported accommodation regulations and Ofsted registration and inspection regimes requirements for providers accommodating 16 to 90-year-olds looked after children and care leavers. Madam Deputy Speaker, I turn now to new clause 14 regarding a notification for when a child is placed into temporary accommodation. I thank my honourable friend, the member for Mitcham and Morden, for her significant campaigning on this issue, and I know that she met with my ministerial colleagues this morning who will be following up with her directly. As she said in her contribution earlier, too many children are spending years in temporary accommodation at a point in their lives when they need space to play and develop, nutritious food to thrive, and access education. While we do not accept this amendment, I understand the rationale behind it and commit to continuing to work with her on the matter. Turning to children placed in secure accommodation, depriving a child of their liberty must always be a last resort, and it is of paramount importance that any restrictions placed on a child are appropriate and for no longer than absolutely necessary. And I do not think, however, that amendments 185 to 187 are necessary. A statutory regime already exists when children are being deprived of their liberty under Section 25 of the Children Act 1989, and this measure will extend to relevant accommodation. The bill gives power to the Secretary of State to make regulations for relevant accommodation to set a maximum period beyond which a child may not be deprived of their liberty without the authorisation of the court. We also intend to bring forward regulations to require local authorities to seek Secretary of State approval before depriving children of their liberty who are under the age of 13 years in relevant accommodation. I now turn to new clause 8, tabled by my honourable friend, the member for Lowestoft. Protecting children at risk of abuse is at the heart of this bill. Regarding the common law defence of reasonable chastisement, we are looking closely at the legal changes made in Wales and in Scotland, but have no plans to legislate at this stage. Wells is in the process of reviewing the impact of changing the law, and we will publish their findings by the end of 2025. We want to look at the evidence before taking such a significant legislative step. I turn to new clause 4, tabled by an honourable friend, the member for Dulwich and West Norwood. All children must have an assessment of their health when they become looked after. Existing regulations require that this must be completed by a registered medical practitioner, include assessment of emotional and mental health, and be kept under review. I turn to new clause 37, tabled by the Right Honourable Member for Sevenoaks. This amendment is not required. There is already robust protections in place where proceedings have been initiated. Pre-proceedings will almost always be initiated when a local authority has determined that child protection activity is not sufficient to keep a child safe and promote their welfare. The initiation of proceedings will not result in the automatic discharge of a child protection plan. A plan can only be discharged through a decision taken at the Child Protection Conference between multi-agency practitioners who have been working with the child and their family. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, one area where the Government hasn't wasted any time is on taking action against child sexual abuse. New clauses 15 and 50, covering recommendations of the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse, are addressed by the steps this Government has taken and will take to deliver the change the justice victims deserve. In January, the Home Secretary made a statement to the House to confirm the Government will lay out a clear timetable for taking forward the 20 recommendations from the final ICSA report, including establishing a child protection authority. As the Home Secretary stated, the cross-government ministerial group is considering the working through of the remaining recommendations supported by a new victims and survivors panel. The Government will also be implementing all the remaining recommendations in ICSA's separate standalone report on grooming gangs from February 2022. As part of that, we will update key guidance on child sexual exploitation. Second reading saw political opportunism of its worst kind from the official opposition. I'd like to take this opportunity at the dispatch box to frankly condemn it. The Home Secretary, the Education Secretary and the Minister for Violence Against Women and Girls all have a track record of standing up against this abuse and in government. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, they are acting decisively. Now, turning to the new bandwagon Conservatives have jumped on mobile phone use in schools and new clause 36. Phones have no place in schools. That's why the Education Secretary said last week that it's as simple as that. Teachers and head teachers have the government's full backing in ridding our classrooms of the disruption of phones, and they already have the means to do so. And we will be checking this is happening, strengthening government monitoring of implementation of the guidance to ensure that our classrooms are phone-free. But I must note, as a number of members have mentioned tonight, that just a year ago, the Conservatives claimed that their action meant mobile phones were prohibited in schools and that their guidance meant a consistent approach across all schools. So it begs the question, Madam Deputy Speaker, what's changed? What has actually changed? It's not only the Education Secretary's statements that the Right Honourable Member for Sevenoaks seems to have missed. She's missed the Secretary of State for Science and Technology already announcing the studies she asked for. They've been conducted by the University of Cambridge and will report back before the end of the school year. She's even missed the Health Secretary just this month confirming that the Chief Medical Officer will consider the impact of phones and advice for parents. So, of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, we hear parents' concerns about screen time, but this is a wider issue across the board which isn't exclusive to schools. And it's an issue on which we're already acting across government to ensure that parents and teachers are supported to ensure children's safety and well-being is protected.
I can't hear the Minister speak, so I assume that nobody else can. Stephen Morgan.
The Right Honourable Member had the opportunity during the debate to come in, but he's chosen to stand up at the very end of the debate to make an intervention now. I mean, Just shows you where his interest is in these issues. Madam Deputy Speaker, we take these matters seriously because we take children's well-being seriously. And the clue is in the name, Labour's Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill. The measures in this bill to protect children from harm, to improve their schools, to save their education from causing financial distress from their parents, all return to their well-being. And we know mental health goes hand in hand with well-being. I was at this very dispatch box just last week to discuss the support that we are offering in schools, and we will, of course, have more time on that to talk about those issues further. I understand new clause 29 seeks to be supportive on this matter, and the government recognises the importance of understanding trends in the well-being of children and young people. Indeed, schools are already encouraged to measure pupil well-being. Now, turning to amendments tabled by the Honourable Member for Sevenoaks related to information sharing. As set out at committee, Amendment 182 would create a very broad duty that would be difficult to implement in practice. And additionally, working together to safeguard children already sets out the duties of practitioners in sharing and acting upon information received. On Amendment 181, we do agree that the documenting of decisions around information sharing is important and cover this in our non-statutory guidance on information sharing. And we intend to strengthen this by addressing these matters in statutory guidance, which relate to relevant persons would require to have regard to. Now, finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, to address new clause 10 and Amendment 171 and the topic that has become a priority for members on this side of the House, listening to our constituents who demand change. That topic is support for children with SEND. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, the last Conservative Education Secretary deemed the system that they left behind lose, lose, lose. And the current Conservative Deputy Chief Whip said they didn't do enough and that they should hang their heads in shame. Madam Deputy Speaker, we agree. And the difference is we're doing something about it. I'll be honest, I find it hard to take lectures from members opposite on education, knowing the scale of the mess that they left behind and the families that feel failed with no support, no understanding, no plan to turn things around. Then to come to this place and bemoan the change that this government is driving. Madam Deputy Speaker, I just find it shameful. On the new clause and amendment, I appreciate the honourable member's input and noting that nothing is off the table when it comes to SEND reform, but what I would say is that this government does not want to tinker around the edges of what is, frankly, a generational challenge, and reform must be wide-ranging, whole system and expert-led, and that is why we plan and we will set out our plans in due course. Let me also assure the member for Twickenham that we are considering the place of profit in special schools, and I hope she will agree that it would not be appropriate to extend the profit cap powers to a different sector before we set out a plan to deal with issues in the SEND system. We want to consider the role and function of independent special schools holistically, and we will set out our plans for SEND reform in due course. So in conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, through our plan for change, this government will give children growing up in our country the best start in life. Each day we are breaking down barriers to opportunity so background doesn't determine where you end up in life, so that if you work hard, you can get on. This bill, through its focus on driving high and rising school standards, on cutting the cost of sending children to school, and, as we have covered today, stopping vulnerable children falling through the cracks, represents a child-centred government in action. This kind of government that was sadly lacking for so long, but is back with Labour.
The question is that new clause 18 be read a second time. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that new clause 18 be added to the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We come to Government new clause 19. I call the Minister to move new clause 19 formally.
Formally moved.
Status on which duty under section Corporate Parenting Responsibilities 1 does not apply.
The question is that new clause 19 be read a second time. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that new clause 19 be added to the bill. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to Government New Clause 20. I call the Minister to move New Clause 20 formally.
Formally moved.
Corporate parenting duty, collaborative working.
The question is that new clause 20 be read a second time. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that new clause 20 be added to the bill. As many as that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to Government New Clause 21. I call the Minister to move New Clause 21 formally.
Formally moved.
Duty to have regard to guidance.
The question is that New Clause 21 be read a second time. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that New Clause 21 be added to the bill. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We come to Government New Clause 22. I call the Minister to move New Clause 22 formally.
Formally moved.
Reports by Secretary of State.
The question is that New Clause 22 be read a second time. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that New Clause 22 be added to the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. New Clause 14 has been selected for separate decision. Not moved. New Clause 36 has been selected for separate decision. I call Laura Trott to move New Clause 36 formally.
Move formally. Action to promote children's wellbeing in relation to mobile phones and social media.
The question is that New Clause 36 be read a second time. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. The question is that New Clause 36 be read a second time. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. The tellers for the ayes are Nick Timothy and Andrew Snowden. The tellers for the noes, Keir Mather and Martin McCluskey.
Order.
The ayes to the right, 159. The noes to the left, 317.
The ayes were 159, the noes were 317, so the noes have it, unlocked. With the leave of the House, I shall put a single question on Government Amendments 111 to 117. I call the Minister to move Amendments 111 to 117 formally.
Formally move.
The question is that Government Amendments 111 to 117 be made. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Amendment 188 has been selected for separate decision. I call Laura Trott to move the amendment formally.
Move formally.
The question is that Amendment 188 be made. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no.
No.
Division, clear the lobby. Order. Order. The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no.
No.
Tellers for the ayes, Nick Timothy, Andrew Snowden. Tellers for the noes, Kay Mather, Martin McCluskey. Order.
The ayes to the right, 160. The noes to the left, 319.
Yeah. One more.
The ayes were 160, the noes were 319. So the noes have it, the noes have it. Unlock. I call the Minister to move Amendment 118 formally.
Formally moved.
The question is that Government Amendment 118 be made. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Amendment 171 has been selected for a separate decision. I call Munira Wilson to move the amendment formally.
Move formally.
The question is that Amendment 171 be made. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division, clear the lobby. The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes, Susan Murray, Bobby Dean. Tellers for the noes, Kay Mather, Martin McCluskey. Order, order.
The ayes to the right, 65. The noes to the left, 317.
The ayes were 65, the noes were 317. So the noes have it, the noes have it. Unlock. With the leave of the House, I shall put a single question on Government Amendments 119 to 131. I call the Minister to move Amendments 119 to 131 formally.
Formally move.
The question is that Government Amendments 119 to 131 be made. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We come to Government New Schedule 1. I call the Minister to move New Schedule 1 formally.
Formally move.
Relevant authorities.
The question is that New Schedule 1 be read a second time. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that New Schedule 1 be added to the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Bill to be further considered what day?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow.